Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, we pick up where we left off, diving deeper into the myths that echo through temples and whisper through ancient groves. Before we begin, remember to like and subscribe if these timeless tales help you drift away. And tell me in the comments where you're listening from. It's always a wonder to see this circle of dreamers around the world. Now, get cozy, dim the lights, and let's continue our journey together. Last time, we uncovered how the ancient Greeks imagined their gods, beings who looked human yet wielded cosmic power, driven by passions as wild as nature itself. We traced the rise of Zeus, the Titanomachia, and the myths that shaped their worldviews. Now, the story deepens. The earliest Italian tribes, who tended to the land, saw this deity as the god of spring. He was the one who conquered the chill of winter and nurtured the gentle arts of agriculture. But as the Romans rose, a warlike nation at heart, Mars began to shed his peaceful nature. As the god of war, he climbed to the heights of the Olympic gods, second only to Jupiter. The Romans embraced him as their protector, believing him to be the father of Romulus and Remus, the founders of their great city. Yet even as the god of war, he remained a guardian of agriculture, watching over the well-being of the state. With a warrior's stride, he marched to battle, known as Gradivus, believed by the Romans to lead them as their invisible protector. As the overseer of the fields, he was called Silvanus, and as the guardian of the state, he bore the name Quirinus. 12 priests served Mars, known as the Salii or dancers, for their sacred dances in full armor were a vital part of their rituals. This order, chosen from noble families, was established by Numa Pompilius, who entrusted them with the ancilii, the sacred shields. One morning, as Numa prayed for Jupiter's protection over the newly founded Rome, the god sent down a shining oblong shield. As it fell at Numa's feet, a voice proclaimed that the city's future safety depended on its preservation. To safeguard this treasure, Numa had 11 more made, each entrusted to the Salii. Before any Roman army ventured into battle, they solemnly invoked the god of war. Any misfortune was seen as his anger, and they sought to appease him with extraordinary offerings and prayers. In Rome, a vast field called the Campus Martius was dedicated to Mars. Here, armies gathered and were reviewed, the people assembled, and young nobles trained in martial skills. Among the many temples honoring Mars, the most magnificent was built by Augustus in the Forum to commemorate the defeat of Caesar's murderers. The most famous statue of Mars is found in the Villa Ludovisi at Rome. He stands as a powerful, muscular figure, full of youthful vigor, in a pose of thoughtful repose. His curly hair and strong features speak of his fierce character. At his feet, the little god of love gazes up, undaunted by the mighty war god, as if aware that this calmness is due to his gentle influence. Religious festivals for Mars were often held in March, with another on the Ides of October, marked by chariot races. After the races, the right-hand horse of the winning team was sacrificed to him. In ancient times, human sacrifices, especially prisoners of war, were offered, but this cruel practice faded away. Mars is associated with a helmet, shield, and spear. The animals sacred to him include the wolf, the horse, the vulture, and the woodpecker. Alongside Mars, there was a goddess named Bellona, the fierce female deity of battle. She is often seen guiding his war chariot, her presence igniting rage and cruelty. In full armor with disheveled hair, she wields a scourge in one hand and a lance in the other. A temple was dedicated to her on the Campus Martius. At its entrance, a pillar stood, over which a spear was thrown. When war was declared, Nike, the goddess of victory, was the daughter of the Titan Palace, and Styx, the nymph of the river below. In her statues, she resembles Athene, but her large, graceful wings and flowing drapery set her apart. In her left hand, she holds a laurel crown, and in her right a palm branch. Nike often appears alongside colossal statues of Zeus or Pallas Athene, standing on a ball held by the deity she accompanies. Sometimes she is depicted inscribing victory on a conqueror's shield, her right foot raised upon a ball. A celebrated temple for Nike was built on the Acropolis at Athens, still standing in excellent condition today. Under the name of Victoria, Nike was revered by the Romans, whose love for conquest defined them. Several sanctuaries in Rome honored her, the most prominent on the Capitol, where victorious generals erected statues to commemorate their triumphs. The grandest of these was raised by Augustus after the Battle of Actium. A festival in her honor was celebrated on the 12th of April. Hermes, the swift-footed messenger, was the trusted ambassador of the gods, guiding souls to Hades. He oversaw the education of the young, encouraging athletic pursuits. Statues of him adorned gymnasiums and wrestling schools throughout Greece. He is said to have invented the alphabet and taught the art of foreign languages. His cunning and versatility made him Zeus's chosen attendant. When the god walked among mortals, worshipped as the god of eloquence, his skill was vital for successful negotiations. He was also seen as the one who brought prosperity to flocks and herds, and thus, herdsmen held him in special reverence. In ancient times, trade was often conducted through the exchange of cattle. Hermes, the god of herdsmen, became the protector of merchants. His quick wit and cleverness were seen as valuable traits in both buying and selling. So, he was also regarded as the patron of artifice and cunning. This idea was so deeply rooted in the minds of the Greek people that he was believed to be the god of thieves and of all those who lived by their wits. As the patron of commerce, Hermes was thought to promote connections among nations. He was the god of travelers, watching over their safety. He punished those who refused to help the lost or weary wayfarer. Hermes was also the guardian of streets and roads. His statues, known as Hermae, were pillars of stone topped with his head. They stood at crossroads in streets and public squares. Being the god of all ventures involving gain, he was worshipped as the giver of wealth and good fortune. Any unexpected slide of luck was attributed to his influence. He even presided over the game of dice, said to have been taught to him by Apollo. Hermes was the son of Zeus and Maia, the eldest and most beautiful of the 7 Pleiades, daughters of Atlas. He was born in a cave on Mount Cyllene in Arcadia. Even as a babe, he showed extraordinary cunning. In fact, he was a thief from his cradle. Not long after his birth, he crept stealthily out of the cave to steal some oxen belonging to his brother Apollo, who was tending the flocks of Admetus. But before he could go far, he found a tortoise. He killed it, stretched 7 strings across its empty shell, and invented a lyre. With exquisite skill, he began to play. After amusing himself, he placed the lyre in his cradle and resumed his journey to Pieria, where Admetus's cattle grazed. Arriving at sunset, he separated 50 oxen from his brother's herd. He drove them before him, careful to cover his feet with sandals made of myrtle twigs to avoid detection. Yet, an old shepherd named Battus, tending the flocks of Neleus, king of Pylos, witnessed the theft. Frightened of being discovered, Hermes bribed him with the finest cow in the herd to keep the secret. Battus promised to remain silent, but Hermes, clever as he was dishonest, decided to test the shepherd's integrity. Feigning to leave, he took the form of Admetus and returned, offering Battus 2 of his best oxen if he would reveal the thief. The greedy shepherd, unable to resist, gave the information. In response, Hermes used his divine power to turn him into a lump of touchstone, a punishment for his treachery and greed. Hermes then sacrificed 2 of the oxen to himself and the other gods, hiding the rest in the cave. He extinguished the fire and threw his twig shoes into the river Alpheus before returning to Cyllene. Apollo, with his all-seeing power, soon discovered who had robbed him. He hurried to Cyllene, demanding the return of his property. When he complained to Maia about her son's actions, she pointed to the innocent babe, seemingly fast asleep in his cradle. Apollo angrily awakened the child and accused him of the theft. But the clever little one denied it, even asking in the most naive manner what cows were. Apollo threatened to throw him into Tartarus if he did not confess, but it was all in vain. Finally, he seized the babe and brought him before Zeus, who was seated in the council chamber of the gods. Zeus listened to Apollo's charge and sternly asked Hermes where he had hidden the cattle. The child, still swaddled, looked bravely into his father's face and said, "Do I look capable of driving away a herd of cattle? I was born yesterday, and my feet are too soft to tread in rough places. Until now, I lay in sweet sleep on my mother's bosom, never crossing our threshold. You know I am innocent. If you wish, I will swear it by the most solemn oaths." As the child stood before him, a picture of innocence, Zeus couldn't help but smile at his cleverness. But knowing his guilt, he commanded Hermes to lead Apollo to the cave where he had hidden the herd. Seeing that further deception was useless, Hermes obeyed without hesitation. As Apollo was about to drive his cattle back to Pieria, Hermes, as if by chance, touched the chords of his lyre. Until then, Apollo had only heard the music of his own three-stringed lyre and Pan's pipe. As he listened, entranced by the delightful strains of this new instrument, his desire to possess it grew strong. He gladly offered the oxen in exchange, promising Hermes full dominion over flocks and herds, horses, and all the wild animals of the woods. The offer was accepted, and thus a reconciliation was made between the brothers. Hermes became the god of herdsmen, while Apollo devoted himself to the art of music. Together, they went to Olympus, where Apollo introduced Hermes as his chosen friend and companion. He made Hermes swear by the Styx that he would never steal his lyre or bow, nor invade his sanctuary at Delphi. Then, Apollo presented him with the caduceus, a golden wand. This wand was topped with wings, and Apollo explained that it had the power to unite in love all beings divided by hate. To prove this, Hermes threw it down between two fighting snakes. The angry combatants embraced, curling around the staff, remaining forever attached. The wand represented power, the serpents, wisdom, and the wings, swift action, all qualities of a trustworthy ambassador. The young god was gifted by his father a winged silver cap, known as the petasus, and silver wings for his feet, called talaria. With these, he was appointed the herald of the gods, and the conductor of shades to Hades, a role once held by Hades. As the messenger of the gods, he was called upon for tasks that required special skill, tact, or swift action. He guided Hera, Athene, and Aphrodite to Paris, led Priam to Achilles to plead for Hector's body, bound Prometheus to Mount Caucasus, secured Ixion to the eternally spinning wheel, and even vanquished Argus, the hundred-eyed guardian of Io. As the conductor of shades, Hermes was invoked by those nearing death to ensure a safe and swift passage across the Styx. He had the power to bring back spirits from the beyond, acting as the bridge between the living and the dead. The poets tell many delightful tales of the youthful mischief this playful god brought upon the other immortals. For instance, he boldly took Medusa's head from Athene's shield, playfully attaching it to Hephaestus's back. He stole Aphrodite's girdle, took Artemis's arrows, and Ares's spear. Yet, these acts were done with such grace and humor that even the gods and goddesses he teased found it hard to stay angry. He became a beloved figure among them all. One day, as Hermes flew over Athens, he spotted maidens in solemn procession, returning from the temple of Pallas Athene. Among them was Herse, the beautiful daughter of King Cecrops. Captivated by her beauty, Hermes decided to seek an audience with her. He approached her sister, Agraulos, requesting her help. But Agraulos, greedy by nature, demanded a hefty sum for her assistance. It didn't take long for Hermes to gather the gold he needed, and he returned with a purse filled to the brim. However, Athene, wishing to punish Agraulos's greed, sent the demon of envy to possess her. Unable to bear her sister's potential happiness, Agraulos sat resolutely at the door, refusing to let Hermes enter. Despite his gentle persuasion, she remained stubborn. Finally, Hermes, weary of her obstinacy, transformed her into a mass of black stone. With the obstacle gone, he successfully won her's heart, and they became husband and wife. In statues, Hermes is depicted as a youthful figure beardless, with a broad chest and graceful, muscular limbs. His face is handsome and intelligent, a warm smile of kindness gracing his delicately chiseled lips. As the messenger of the gods, he wears the petasus and talaria, holding the caduceus, or herald's staff, in his hand. As the god of eloquence, he is often shown with chains of gold hanging from his lips, and as the patron of merchants, he carries a purse. The remarkable excavations in Olympia revealed a stunning marble group of Hermes and the infant Bacchus, crafted by Praxiteles. In this exquisite artwork, Hermes is portrayed as a young man, looking down affectionately at the child resting in his arms. Sadly, only the infant's right hand remains, lovingly placed on Hermes's shoulder. The offerings to Hermes included incense, honey, cakes, pigs, and especially lambs and young goats. As the god of eloquence, the tongues of animals were sacrificed to him. Mercury, the Roman counterpart of Hermes, was the god of commerce and gain. A temple was erected for him near the Circus Maximus as early as 495 BC. He also had a temple and sacred fountain near the Porta Capena. This fountain was believed to hold magical powers, and during Mercury's festival on May 25th, merchants would sprinkle themselves and their goods with the holy water, hoping for prosperous returns. The Officiales, Roman priests tasked with safeguarding public faith, refused to see Mercury as the same as Hermes. They insisted he be depicted with a sacred branch, symbolizing peace, instead of the caduceus. Yet, in later times, he was fully identified with the Greek Hermes. Dionysus, also known as Bacchus, was the god of wine, embodying the blessings of nature itself. His worship is thought to have originated in Asia, likely from India, before spreading to Thrace and beyond. Dionysus was the son of Zeus and Semele. Zeus rescued him from the flames that consumed his mother when she beheld his divine glory. The motherless child was entrusted to Hermes, who brought him to Semele's sister, Ino. But Hera, relentless in her vengeance, drove Ino's husband, Athamas, to madness. To keep the child safe, he was then placed in the care of the nurturing nymphs of Mount Nysa. An aged satyr named Silenus, the son of Pan, became his guardian and teacher. The young god grew fond of his kind tutor, and thus, Silenus often appeared as a key figure in the many adventures of the wine god. Dionysus passed through a gentle and uneventful childhood. He roamed the woods and forests, surrounded by nymphs, satyrs, and shepherds. During one of these peaceful rambles, he discovered a fruit growing wild, a fruit that was refreshing and cooling. This was the vine, from which he learned to extract a juice, creating a most exhilarating beverage. After his companions partook freely of it, they felt a delightful excitement wash over them. They shouted, sang, and danced, their joy overflowing like a river. Soon, a crowd gathered, eager to taste this magical drink, and to join in the worship of the divinity who had gifted them this new pleasure. Seeing how blissfully his discovery affected his followers, Dionysus resolved to share this joy with all of mankind. He understood that wine, when enjoyed in moderation, could bring happiness and foster connections. Under its warm influence, the sorrowful could forget their grief, and the sick could find relief from their pain. So, he gathered his devoted followers, and they set forth on their travels, planting the vine and teaching its cultivation wherever they went. Now we see Dionysus leading a vibrant army of men, women, fauns, and satyrs. They carried the thyrsus, a staff entwined with vine branches, topped with a fir cone. Cymbals clashed and musical instruments echoed through the air. Seated in a chariot drawn by panthers, Dionysus made a triumphant journey through lands like Syria, Egypt, Arabia, and India. He conquered all before him, founded cities, and spread a more civilized and sociable way of life among the people he encountered. But when Dionysus returned to Greece from his eastern adventures, he faced fierce opposition. Lycurgus, the king of Thrace, and Pentheus, the king of Thebes, disapproved of the wild revelry surrounding the worship of the wine god. Lycurgus drove away the nymphs from their sacred mountain, and intimidated Dionysus so much that he leaped into the sea, where the ocean nymph Thetis welcomed him. Yet the impious king paid dearly for his sacrilege. He lost his mind, and in a fit of madness, he tragically killed his own son, Dryas, mistaking him for a vine. Pentheus, king of Thebes, was alarmed by how his subjects were captivated by the wild worship of Dionysus. Fearing the consequences of such revelry, he forbade his people from participating in the Bacchanalian festivities. In an attempt to save him from his folly, Dionysus appeared before Pentheus disguised as a youth in the king's entourage. He earnestly warned him to cease his denunciations, but the warning only fueled Pentheus' anger. He commanded that Dionysus be imprisoned, and cruel preparations were made for his execution. Yet, the god soon freed himself from his confinement. As soon as his jailers departed, the prison doors opened on their own, and his iron chains fell away. He escaped to rejoin his devoted followers. Meanwhile, the king's mother and her sisters, filled with Bacchanalian fervor, had gone to Mount Cithaeron to join the women in worship. Enraged by their disobedience, Pentheus decided to witness the wild excesses for himself. He hid behind a tree on the mountain, but was soon discovered. In a horrifying turn of fate, he was dragged out by the frenzied Bacchantes, and tragically torn apart by his own mother, Agave, and her sisters. One day, as Dionysus traveled, he encountered a band of Tyrrhenian pirates. They saw him as a beautiful youth in radiant garments and thought to capture him for profit. They seized him, bound him, and took him aboard their ship, planning to sell him as a SLV. But the chains fell from his limbs, and the pilot, realizing the miracle, urged his companions to return the youth to shore. He warned them that they were dealing with a god, and that storms would follow their impious actions. Yet they refused to release their captive and sailed into the open sea. Suddenly, the ship stood still. Vines and ivy covered the masts and sails, fragrant wine flooded the vessel, and heavenly music filled the air. The terrified crew, filled with regret, crowded around the pilot, pleading for safety. But the hour of retribution had come. Dionysus transformed into a lion, and beside him appeared a bear. With a terrifying roar, the bear attacked the captain, tearing him apart. The sailors, in their panic, leaped overboard, and were transformed into dolphins. Only the wise and pious pilot was spared. Dionysus, returning to his true form, offered him kind words of encouragement and revealed his divine nature. They set sail once more, and Dionysus asked the pilot to take him to the island of Naxos. There he found the lovely Ariadne, daughter of Minos, king of Crete. She had been abandoned by Theseus and lay asleep on a rock, weary from sorrow and tears. Captivated by her beauty, Dionysus gazed at her, and when she opened her eyes, he revealed himself. In gentle tones, he sought to ease her grief. Grateful for his kindness, she slowly regained her serenity. Yielding to his affection, she agreed to become his wife. Dionysus, having established his worship across the world, descended into the realm of shades. He sought his ill-fated mother, and brought her to Olympus, where she was welcomed among the immortal gods as thy one. Among the most devoted worshippers of Dionysus was Midas, the wealthy king of Phrygia. He was the same king who, as you may recall, once judged against Apollo. One day, Silenus, the dear friend and teacher of Dionysus, found himself wandering, lost and intoxicated, in the lush rose gardens of Midas. The king's attendants discovered him there, and, with gentle hands, they bound him with roses, leading him to their royal master. Midas welcomed the aged satyr with the utmost kindness. For 10 days he entertained Silenus, showering him with hospitality. When the time came to return him to Dionysus, the god was so grateful for Midas's generosity that he offered to grant the king any wish he desired. But Midas, ever greedy, wished for more. He asked that everything he touched would turn to gold. The god granted this wish, but in a way that brought Midas great sorrow. As hunger gnawed at him, he reached for food, only to find it turning to gold before he could eat. When he lifted a cup of wine to his lips, the sparkling liquid transformed into the very metal he had longed for. Even his once comfortable couch became a bed of gold, a heavy burden rather than a blessing. In despair, Midas cried out to Dionysus, begging him to take back this dreadful gift. The god, moved by his plight, instructed Midas to bathe in the river Pactolus, a small stream in Lydia. As he obeyed, the power that had cursed him slipped away, and from that moment on, the sands of the Pactolus sparkled with grains of gold. Dionysus is depicted in two ways. In the earliest representations, he appears as a dignified man, in the prime of life. His face is earnest and thoughtful, adorned with a full beard, draped in the garments of an Eastern king. Later sculptors portrayed him as a youthful figure of striking beauty, with a gentle, winning expression. His limbs are supple, and his hair, crowned with a wreath of vine or ivy leaves, cascades in soft curls. In one hand, he holds the thyrsus, and in the other, a drinking cup with two handles, his signature attributes. Often, he is shown riding a panther, or seated in a chariot drawn by lions, tigers, or lynxes. As the god of wine, he embodies sociability, rarely appearing alone, but accompanied by bacchantes, satyrs, and mountain nymphs. One of the finest modern representations of Ariadne is by Dannecker in Frankfurt on the Main. In this statue, she rides on a panther, her beautiful face turned slightly over her left shoulder. Her features are finely cut, and a wreath of ivy encircles her head. With one hand, she gracefully holds the drapery that falls from her form, while the other tenderly rests on the panther's head. Dionysus was also the patron of drama. At the grand festival of the Dionysia in Athens, dramatic performances were held in his honor. Renowned Greek dramatists crafted their timeless tragedies and comedies for this occasion. He was a prophetic deity, possessing oracles, the most notable being on Mount Rhodope in Thrace. Sacred to him were the tiger, lynx, panther, dolphin, serpent, and butt. His favorite plants included the vine, ivy, laurel, and asphodel. Goats were offered as sacrifices, likely due to their penchant for destroying vineyards. The Romans had a deity named Liber, who presided over vegetation. He was identified with the Greek Dionysus and worshipped as Bacchus. The festival of Liber, known as the Liberalia, was celebrated on the 17th of March. Hades, also known as Pluto, was the son of Cronus and Rhea, the youngest brother of Zeus and Poseidon. He ruled the shadowy realm of Erebus, where the spirits of the dead dwelled, along with the exiled deities defeated by Zeus. Hades, the grim monarch of this underworld, succeeded Erebus, the ancient god after whom these realms were named. The early Greeks viewed Hades as their greatest foe. Homer described him as the most detested of all the gods, the grim thief who took their loved ones and ultimately claimed each mortal's share of life. His name was so feared that mortals seldom spoke it, invoking him with a touch to the earth, turning their faces away in sacrifice. In the Homeric age, beliefs about the afterlife were bleak. When a mortal passed away, their spirit lingered in a shadowy form, driven by Hades into his realm. There, they brooded over their earthly fortunes, regretting lost pleasures, existing in a state of semi-consciousness. Only by drinking the blood of sacrifices offered by the living could they regain a fleeting spark of their former vitality. The only beings believed to find happiness in the afterlife were heroes, those whose daring deeds had brought honor to their homeland. Yet even they, as Homer tells us, longed for their earthly lives. When Odysseus visited the underworld at Circe's command, he spoke with the shades of fallen heroes. Achilles lamented that he would rather be the poorest laborer on earth than rule over the realm of shadows. The early Greek poets offered scant references to Erebus. Homer shrouded these realms in mystery, perhaps to evoke awe in the hearts of his listeners. He described the entrance to Erebus as lying beyond the edge of Oceanus, in the far west where the Cimmerians dwelled, wrapped in eternal mist and darkness. In later times, as the world grew larger, and connections with foreign lands deepened, new ideas began to weave their way into the fabric of thought. We see Egyptian beliefs about the afterlife taking root in Greece, blossoming into the shared faith of the people. It was during this time that poets and philosophers, especially the wise teachers of the Eleusinian mysteries, began to teach about the rewards and punishments that awaited souls for their deeds. Hades, once feared as the grim enemy of mankind, who reveled in his dark domain, now welcomed the shades with warmth and friendship. Hermes took on the role of guiding souls to Hades, while Hades transformed into a giver of wealth, bestowing precious metals hidden deep within the earth. The poets spoke of various entrances to Erebus, mostly found in caves and crevices. One lay in the mountain of Taenarum, another in Thesprotia, and the most famous of all, near the ominous lake Avernus in Italy, where no bird dared to fly, for the air was thick with noxious vapors. In Hades' realm, for great rivers flowed, three of which all shades must cross: Acheron, the river of sorrow; Cocytus, the river of lamentation; and Styx, the sacred stream of intense darkness, winding 9 times around these shadowy lands. The shades were ferried across the Styx by Charon, the grim, unshaven boatman. He would only take those whose bodies had been honored with funeral rites, and who had brought with them the necessary toll, a small coin placed beneath the tongue of the deceased. Those who lacked these tokens were left to wander the banks for 100 years, restless and forlorn. On the other side of the Styx stood the tribunal of Minos, the supreme judge. All shades had to present themselves before him, confessing their earthly actions. Minos would then declare their fate, a sentence of happiness or misery, determined by their deeds. Guarding this tribunal was the fearsome Cerberus, the 3-headed dog, with snakes coiling around his necks. He allowed all shades to enter, but none to return. The fortunate spirits destined for Elysium would pass to the right, entering the golden palace where Hades and Persephone held court. There, they received a warm greeting before embarking on their journey to the Elysian fields, a blissful realm filled with wonders. The air was sweet and fragrant, as gentle brooks flowed through meadows alive with 1,000 colors. The groves echoed with the joyful songs of birds. Here, the shades engaged in the same pursuits they loved on earth. The warrior found his horses and arms, the musician his lyre, the hunter his bow and quiver. In a tranquil vale of Elysium flowed the river Lethe, its waters soothing and silent. Those who drank from it forgot their cares and all memories of the past. According to the Pythagorean belief in the cycle of souls, after 1,000 years in Elysium, the shades would inhabit new bodies on earth. Before leaving, they would sip from Lethe to begin anew, free from the weight of their former lives. Meanwhile, the guilty souls, after facing Minos, were led to the great judgment hall of Hades. Its solid adamant walls were surrounded by the fiery river Phlegethon, casting a flickering light upon the dark expanse. Inside sat Rhadamanthus, the dread judge, who revealed the torments awaiting each soul in Tartarus. The Furies seized the wretched sinners, scourging them as they dragged them to the gates of Tartarus, where they would be cast into endless suffering. Tartarus was a vast, shadowy abyss, as far below Hades as the earth is from the sky. There, the Titans, once mighty, now endured a dreary existence. Among the tormented were Attis and Ephialtes, the giant sons of Poseidon, who had dared to challenge the gods. Among the most infamous of the Dmed were Tityus, Tantalus, Sisyphus, Ixion, and the Danaïdes. Tityus, a giant born of the earth, had insulted Hera, and for this offense, Zeus cast him into Tartarus. There, he suffered endlessly, tormented by 2 vultures that feasted on his liver. Tantalus, a wise king of Lydia, once favored by the gods, fell from grace. He stole nectar and ambrosia, and even served his own son, Pelops, to the gods, testing their knowledge. For these crimes, Zeus condemned him to eternal thirst, standing in water that always receded from his lips, while tempting fruits hung just out of reach. Sisyphus, a tyrant who murdered travelers, was punished to roll a massive stone up a hill, only for it to roll back down each time he neared the top. Ixion, a king of Thessaly, was granted the honor of joining the gods at their feasts. Yet he dared to desire Hera, inciting Zeus's wrath. Struck by thunderbolts, he was cast into Tartarus, bound to an ever-revolving wheel. The Danaides were the 50 daughters of Danaus, king of Argos. They had married their 50 cousins, the sons of Aegyptus. By their father's command, warned by an oracle of impending doom, they all killed their husbands in a single night, except for Hypermnestra, who spared her beloved. Their punishment in the underworld was to fill a vessel full of holes with water, a never-ending and futile task. Hades and Persephone. Hades is often depicted as a mature man, with a stern and majestic presence. He bears a striking resemblance to his brother Zeus. Yet, his gloomy expression contrasts sharply with the benevolent face of the mighty ruler of the heavens. He sits upon a throne of ebony, with his queen, the grave and sorrowful Persephone, beside him. His long, flowing black hair cascades down over his forehead, and he wears a full beard. In his hand, he holds either a two-pronged fork or the keys to the lower world, while at his feet lies Cerberus, the three-headed guardian. Sometimes he is seen in a golden chariot, drawn by 4 black horses. Upon his head rests a helmet crafted by the Cyclops, which grants invisibility. This helmet he often lent to both mortals and immortals alike. Hades was worshipped throughout Greece, with temples dedicated to him in Elis, Olympia, and Athens. His sacrifices, held at night, involved black sheep. Instead of being sprinkled on altars, the blood flowed into a trench dug for this purpose. The priests, clad in black robes, wore crowns of cypress. The narcissus, maidenhair, and cypress were sacred to this divine figure. Pluto. Before the Greeks brought their religion and literature to Rome, the Romans had no belief in a realm of future happiness or misery akin to the Greek Hades. They envisioned a vast, dark cavity at the Earth's center, known as Orcus, a place of eternal rest for the dead. With the arrival of Greek mythology, Orcus transformed into the Greek Hades. The Romans began to worship Hades under the name of Pluto, also known as Dis, meaning rich, and Orcus, for the dominions he ruled. In Rome, no temples were built in his honor. Plutus, the son of Demeter and a mortal named Iasion, was the god of wealth. He is depicted as lame when he arrives and winged when he departs. Blind and foolish, he bestows his gifts indiscriminately, often upon the unworthy. Plutus was believed to dwell in the earth's depths, which may explain why, in later times, Hades became confused with him. Minor divinities, the Harpies, like the Furies, were instruments of the gods, punishing the guilty. They were 3 female divinities, daughters of Thaumas and Electra, named Aello, Ocypete, and Seleno. With the head of a fair-haired maiden and the body of a vulture, they were driven by insatiable hunger. They tormented their victims by stealing their food, devouring it with gluttony, or defiling it, rendering it unfit to eat. Their flight was incredibly swift, surpassing even that of birds and the winds. If a mortal vanished suddenly, it was believed the Harpies had carried them away. They were thought to have taken the daughters of King Pandarios to serve the Erinyes. The Harpies embodied sudden tempests, sweeping ruthlessly over the land, carrying off or harming all in their path. Erinyes, Eumenides, the Erinyes or Furies, were female divinities representing the torturous pangs of a guilty conscience and the remorse that follows wrongdoing. Their names were Alecto, Megira, and Tisiphone, with various origins. According to Hesiod, they emerged from the blood of Uranus, wounded by Cronus, embodying the terrible imprecations called down upon the rebellious sun. Other accounts say they were daughters of night. They resided in the underworld, serving Hades and Persephone, punishing shades who had committed crimes without reconciling with the gods. Yet, they also roamed the earth, relentlessly pursuing murderers, perjurers, and those who failed in duty to parents or hospitality to strangers. Nothing escaped their piercing gaze. No corner of the earth was beyond their reach, and no mortal dared offer asylum to their victims. The Furies were often depicted with wings, their bodies black, blood dripping from their eyes, and snakes entwined in their hair. In their hands they carried daggers, scourges, torches, or serpents. When they pursued Orestes, they held up a mirror, forcing him to see the face of his murdered mother. They were also called Eumenides, meaning well-meaning or soothed goddesses. This name was given out of fear, hoping to appease their wrath. Over time, the Furies were seen as guardians of morality, punishing sin to uphold social order. In Athens, they were depicted as earnest maidens, dressed like Artemis in short tunics suitable for the chase, yet still holding their serpentine wands of office. Their sacrifices consisted of black sheep and a mixture of honey and water called Nephalia. A celebrated temple was built for the Eumenides at Athens, near the Areopagus. Moirai or Fates. The ancients believed that the span of human life and the destinies of mortals were guided by three sister goddesses, Clotho, Lachesis, and Atropos. They were the daughters of Zeus and Themis. The power they held over the fate of humanity was beautifully symbolized by a thread spun for each life, from birth to the grave. This delicate task was shared among them. Clotho would wind the flax around the distaff, preparing it for her sister Lachesis, who spun out the thread of life. And when the time came, Atropos would snip it with her scissors, ending the journey of an individual. Homer spoke of a single Moira, the daughter of Night, embodying the moral force that governs the universe. Both mortals and immortals had to submit to her will. Even Zeus himself could not change her decrees. Over time, poets expanded this idea into the three Moirai, who became the divine overseers of life and death. The Moirai were often depicted as stern and relentless female figures, aged and somewhat fearsome, reflecting the slow and steady march of destiny. Yet, artists portrayed them as graceful maidens, with a serious but gentle demeanor. One enchanting image of Lachesis shows her in the bloom of youth and beauty, sitting at her spinning wheel. At her feet lie two masks, one comic and the other tragic. This suggests that to a goddess of fate, the joys and sorrows of life are equally indifferent. She continues her work, undisturbed by human happiness or despair. In the underworld, they are draped in dark robes, but in Olympus, they wear bright garments, sparkling with stars, seated on radiant thrones, adorned with crowns. The Moirai were believed to guide the Furies, indicating the precise punishments for the wicked. They were seen as prophetic deities, with sanctuaries scattered across Greece. They assisted the Charites in bringing Persephone back to her mother, Demeter, during her seasonal reunion. They also appeared alongside Eileithyia, the goddess of birth. Nemesis, the daughter of Nyx, represents the power that balances human affairs, rewarding each individual according to their actions. She honors the humble and punishes the wicked, ensuring that the scales of justice remain even. Though originally a distributor of both rewards and punishments, the world's sins led her to be seen mainly as the avenging goddess. A striking tale of her retribution is found in the story of Niobe. Apollo and Artemis acted as instruments of her vengeance, but it was Nemesis who inspired the act and oversaw its execution. Homer did not mention Nemesis, suggesting she emerged in later times, when moral understanding deepened among the Greeks. She is depicted as a beautiful woman, thoughtful and regal, crowned with a diadem. In her hands, she holds a rudder, a balance, and a cubit, symbols of how she guides and measures human events. Sometimes, she is shown with a wheel, representing the swift execution of justice. As the avenger of evil, she appears with wings, wielding a scourge or sword, seated in a chariot drawn by griffins. Nemesis is often called Adrastia or Rhamnusia, named after Rhamnus in Attica, where her worship thrived, featuring a renowned statue of the goddess. The Romans also honored Nemesis, invoking her on the Capitol as a deity who could avert the harmful effects of envy. Night and her children, death, sleep, and dreams. Nyx, the daughter of chaos, embodies night. In Greek poetry, she is seen as the mother of all things mysterious, including death, sleep, and dreams. She united with Erebus, and together they had children, Ether and Hemera, representing air and daylight, a poetic reminder that darkness always precedes light. Nyx resides in a palace within the shadowy realms of the underworld. She is depicted as a beautiful woman, seated in a chariot drawn by two black horses, clothed in dark robes, with a long veil, accompanied by stars that follow in her wake. Thanatos, or Death, and his twin brother Hypnos, or Sleep, are the children of Nyx. They dwell in the realm of shadows. When they come among mortals, Thanatos is feared and despised, seen as the enemy of life. In contrast, Hypnos is cherished and welcomed, regarded as a kind and gentle friend. Though the ancients viewed Thanatos as a somber figure, he was not depicted as repulsive. Instead, he appears as a beautiful youth, holding an inverted torch, symbolizing the extinguishing of life, with his other arm lovingly around his brother Hypnos. Hypnos is sometimes shown standing with closed eyes, or reclining beside Thanatos, often holding a poppy stalk in his hand. A most interesting description of the abode of Hypnos is found in Ovid's Metamorphoses. He tells us how the god of sleep dwelt in a mountain cave, near the realm of the Cimmerians, where the sun never pierced with his rays. No sound disturbed the stillness, no song of birds, not a branch moved, and no human voice broke the profound silence that reigned everywhere. From the lowermost rocks of the cave, the river Lethe flowed. One might almost have thought its course was arrested, were it not for the low, monotonous hum of the water, inviting slumber. The entrance was partially hidden by countless white and red poppies, which Mother Night had gathered and planted there. From their juice, she extracts drowsiness, scattering it in liquid drops all over the earth, as soon as the sun god has sunk to rest. In the center of the cave stands a couch of blackest ebony, with a bed of down, over which lies a coverlet of sable hue. Here, the god himself reposes, surrounded by innumerable forms. These are idle dreams, more numerous than the sands of the sea. Chief among them is Morpheus, that changeful god, who may assume any shape or form he pleases. Nor can the god of sleep resist his own power, for though he may rouse himself for a while, he soon succumbs to the drowsy influences that surround him. Morpheus, the son of Hypnos, was the god of dreams. He is always represented with wings, appearing sometimes as a youth, sometimes as an old man. In his hand he bears a cluster of poppies, and as he steps with noiseless footsteps over the earth, he gently scatters the seeds of this sleep-producing plant over the eyes of weary mortals. Homer describes the house of dreams as having two gates. One, whence issue all deceptive and flattering visions, is formed of ivory. The other, through which proceed those dreams that are fulfilled, is made of horn. The Gorgons Stheno, Euryale, and Medusa were the three daughters of Phorcys and Ceto. They personified those benumbing, petrifying sensations, resulting from sudden and extreme fear. They were frightful winged monsters, their bodies covered with scales. Hissing, wriggling snakes clustered round their heads instead of hair. Their hands were of brass. Their teeth resembled the tusks of a wild boar. Their whole aspect was so appalling that they turned to stone all who beheld them. These terrible sisters were believed to dwell in a remote and mysterious region, in the far west, beyond the sacred stream of Oceanus. The Gorgons served aids, who used them to terrify and overawe those shades, doomed to a constant state of unrest as punishment for their misdeeds. Meanwhile, the Furies scourged them with their whips, torturing them incessantly. The most celebrated of the three sisters was Medusa, who alone was mortal. She was once a golden-haired and beautiful maiden, devoted to a life of celibacy as a priestess of Athene. But when wooed by Poseidon, whom she loved in return, she forgot her vows and became united to him in marriage. For this offense, she was punished by the goddess in a most terrible manner. Each wavy lock of her beautiful hair was changed into a venomous snake. Her once gentle, love-inspiring eyes became bloodshot, furious orbs, evoking fear and disgust in those who beheld her. Her former roseate hue and milk-white skin took on a loathsome greenish tinge. Seeing herself transformed into such a repulsive object, Medusa fled from her home, never to return. Wandering about, abhorred and shunned by all. She developed into a character worthy of her outward appearance. In her despair, she fled to Africa where, as she passed restlessly from place to place, infant snakes dropped from her hair. Thus, according to ancient belief, that country became the hotbed of these venomous reptiles. With Athene's curse upon her, she turned to stone whomever she gazed upon. At last, after a life of nameless misery, deliverance came in the shape of death at the hands of Perseus. It is well to observe that when the Gorgons are spoken of in the singular, it is Medusa who is alluded to. Medusa was the mother of Pegasus and Chrysaor, father of the three-headed, winged giant Geryones, who was slain by Heracles. The Graeae, who acted as servants to their sisters the Gorgons, were also 3 in number. Their names were Pafredo, Inio, and Dino. In their original CNCPTN, they were personifications of kindly and venerable old age, possessing all its benevolent attributes without its natural infirmities. They were old and gray from their birth, and so they ever remained. In later times, however, they came to be regarded as misshapen females, decrepit and hideously ugly. They had only one eye, one tooth, and one gray wig between them, which they lent to each other when one wished to appear before the world. When Perseus entered upon his expedition to slay Medusa, he repaired to the abode of the Graeae in the far west to inquire the way to the Gorgons. When they refused to give any information, he deprived them of their one eye, tooth, and wig, and did not restore them until he received the necessary directions. The Sphinx was an ancient Egyptian divinity, personifying wisdom and the FRTLTY of nature. She is represented as a lion couchant, with the head and bust of a woman, wearing a peculiar hood that envelopes her head, falling down on either side of her face. Transplanted into Greece, this sublime and mysterious Egyptian deity degenerates into an insignificant, yet malignant power. Though she also deals in mysteries, they are of a totally different character, and altogether inimical to human life. According to Greek genealogy, the Sphinx is the offspring of Typhon and Echidna. Hera, displeased with the Thebans, sent them this awful monster as punishment for their offenses. Taking her seat on a rocky eminence near the city of Thebes, commanding a pass that the Thebans had to traverse, she propounded a riddle to all who approached. If they failed to solve it, she tore them to pieces. During the reign of King Creon, so many people had fallen victim to this monster that he determined to rid the country of such a scourge. Consulting the Oracle of Delphi, he was informed that the only way to destroy the Sphinx was to solve one of her riddles. When he did, she would immediately precipitate herself from the rock on which she was seated. Creon made a public declaration. He announced that whoever could solve the riddle posed by the monster would earn the crown, and the hand of his sister, Jocaste. Oedipus stepped forward as a candidate. He approached the spot where the Sphinx kept her watch and received her riddle. What creature goes in the morning on 4 legs, at noon on 2, and in the evening on 3? Oedipus thought carefully, and replied that it must be man. In his infancy he crawls on all 4s. In his prime he walks upright on 2 legs. And in old age, when his strength wanes, he uses a staff for support, thus having, in a way, 3 legs. As soon as the Sphinx heard this answer, the correct solution, she flung herself over the precipice, and perished in the abyss below. The Greek Sphinx can be recognized by her wings, and her smaller size compared to the Egyptian Sphinx. Tyche, or Fortuna, personified that unique blend of circumstances we call luck or fortune. She was seen as the source of all unexpected events in life, whether they were good or bad. If someone succeeded without special merit, it was believed that Tyche smiled upon their birth. But if misfortune followed them, it was thought to be her adverse influence. This goddess of fortune is depicted in various ways. Sometimes, she holds 2 rudders, steering the ships of the fortunate and the unfortunate alike. In later times, she appears blindfolded, standing on a ball or wheel, symbolizing the fickleness of fortune. Often, she carries a scepter and a cornucopia, the horn of plenty, and is usually depicted with wings. In her temple at Thebes, She is shown holding the infant Plutus, representing her power over wealth and prosperity. Tyche was worshipped in many parts of Greece, especially by the Athenians, who believed she favored their city. In Rome, Tyche was known as Fortuna and held a more significant role than in Greece. In later representations, Fortuna is no longer winged or standing on a ball. She simply carries the cornucopia. She came to be seen as the goddess of good luck, bringing blessings to humanity, rather than as a personification of fortune's fluctuations. Alongside Fortuna, the Romans also worshipped Felicitas, the giver of positive good fortune. As Ananke, Tyche took on a different character, embodying the immutable laws of nature. In a statue found in Athens, she was depicted with bronze hands, surrounded by nails and hammers. The bronze hands symbolized the irresistible power of the inevitable, while the hammer and chains represented the fetters she forged for humanity. Ananke was worshipped in Rome as Necessitas. In addition to the Moire, who presided over mortal lives, there was another divinity called Cur. Each person had a Cur assigned at birth, believed to grow with them, for good or ill. When fate was to be decided, a person's Cur was weighed, and based on its worth, life or death was determined. Thus, the early Greeks believed each individual could, to some extent, influence their own existence. The Caris, often mentioned by Homer, were goddesses who reveled in the slaughter of battlefields. 8. The daughter of Zeus and Eris, was a divinity who thrived on chaos. She instigated Hera to deprive Heracles of his birthright, and was cast out of Olympus by her father. From then on, she wandered among mortals, sowing discord, mischief, and leading them to actions that harmed their happiness. So, when friends reconciled after a quarrel, 8 was often blamed for the initial discord. Momus, the son of Nyx, was the god of mockery and ridicule. He delighted in criticizing the actions of gods and men, always finding flaws. When Prometheus created the first man, Momus thought it incomplete, for there was no opening in the BRST to reveal inner thoughts. He also criticized a house built by Athene for lacking the means to move from an unhealthy place. Only Aphrodite escaped his scrutiny, for he found no fault in her perfect form. How the ancients depicted this god remains a mystery, but in modern art, he appears like a jester, with a fool's cap and bells. Eros, the divine spirit of love, emerged from chaos, bringing order and harmony to the world. Initially, he was portrayed as a beautiful youth, crowned with flowers, leaning on a shepherd's crook. Over time, this image faded, replaced by the mischievous son of Aphrodite, the familiar little god of love. In one myth, Aphrodite complained to Themis that her son, though beautiful, did not grow. Themis suggested that his small size was due to his solitude, and advised her to give him a companion. Aphrodite then introduced him to his younger brother, Anteros, the embodiment of requited love. Soon, Eros began to grow and thrive, but this only lasted as long as they were together. When they were separated, Eros shrank back to his original size. By degrees, the idea of Eros began to multiply. We hear of little love gods, known as amours, who appear in the most charming and varied forms. These love gods provided artists with endless inspiration, depicted in delightful activities like hunting, fishing, rowing, and even engaging in mechanical tasks. Eros and Psyche. Perhaps no myth is more enchanting than that of Eros and Psyche. Psyche, the youngest of 3 princesses, was so breathtakingly beautiful that even Aphrodite became jealous. No mortal dared to seek her hand. As her sisters, who were not as lovely, found husbands, Psyche remained alone. Her father sought the oracle of Delphi, and, following its divine guidance, dressed her as if for a grave, leading her to the edge of a deep precipice. Once alone, she felt herself lifted and gently carried away by Zephyrus, the west wind. He brought her to a lush meadow, where a grand palace stood, surrounded by groves and sparkling fountains. Here dwelled Eros, the god of love. Zephyrus gently placed Psyche in his arms. Though unseen, Eros wooed her with soft whispers of affection, but warned her, as she cherished his love, not to seek his form. For a time, Psyche obeyed her immortal husband, but happiness turned to longing for her sisters. In response to her wish, Zephyrus brought them to her enchanting home. Filled with envy at Psyche's joy, they poisoned her thoughts against Eros, telling her he was a terrifying monster. They handed her a sharp dagger, urging her to use it to free herself from his grasp. After her sisters left, Psyche resolved to follow their cruel advice. In the stillness of night, she rose holding a lamp in one hand and the dagger in the other. Stealthily, she approached the couch, where Eros lay sleeping. But instead of a monster, she beheld the beautiful form of the god of love. Overcome with surprise and admiration, she leaned closer when a drop of hot oil from her lamp fell upon his shoulder. Eros awoke, and seeing Psyche with the dagger, sorrowfully reproached her for her betrayal. With a flutter of his wings, he flew away. In despair, Psyche sought to end her life, throwing herself into the nearest river. But the waters cradled her gently, carrying her to the opposite bank, where Pan, the god of shepherds, awaited. He consoled her, offering hope of reconciliation with her beloved. Meanwhile, her wicked sisters, hoping for the same fortune, stood at the edge of the rock, only to plunge into the chasm below. Psyche, filled with restless yearning for her lost love, wandered the world in search of him. Finally, she appealed to Aphrodite for compassion, but the goddess, still jealous of her beauty, imposed the hardest tasks upon her. Yet, in these trials, invisible, kind beings sent by Eros assisted her, watching over her welfare. Psyche endured a long and arduous penance before she could regain the happiness she had foolishly lost. At last, Aphrodite commanded her to descend into the underworld and retrieve a box containing all the charms of beauty from Persephone. Psyche's courage faltered, as she feared death awaited her in the realm of shadows. Just as despair threatened to consume her, a voice warned her of the dangers ahead, guiding her with essential precautions. She was told to bring the ferryman's toll for Charon and a cake to soothe Cerberus. She must not partake in the banquets of Hades and Persephone, and above all, she must bring the box of beauty charms unopened to Aphrodite. The voice assured her that following these instructions would ensure her safe return to the light. But alas, Psyche, despite her best efforts, could not resist the temptation of the last condition. As she left the underworld, curiosity overwhelmed her, and she opened the box, expecting beauty. Instead, a thick black mist poured forth, casting her into a deep, death-like sleep. Eros, who had been watching over her unseen, finally awakened her with the tip of one of his golden arrows. He gently reproached her for her curiosity and folly, then persuaded Aphrodite to forgive her. Eros convinced Zeus to welcome Psyche among the immortal gods. Their reunion was celebrated with joy, as all the Olympian deities rejoiced. The Graces sprinkled perfume on their path. The Hours scattered roses across the sky. Apollo added the sweet music of his lyre, and the Muses joined in a chorus of delight. This myth seems to be an allegory, suggesting that the soul must endure trials and sorrows before reuniting with its divine essence. Eros is depicted as a lovely boy, with rounded limbs and a playful, mischievous expression. He has golden wings and a quiver slung over his shoulder, filled with magical, unerring arrows. In one hand, he holds a golden bow, and in the other, a torch. Often, he is shown riding a lion, dolphin, or eagle, or seated in a chariot drawn by stags or wild boars. These images symbolize love's power, as it conquers all, even the wildest of creatures. In Rome, Eros was worshipped as Amor or Cupid. Hymen, or Hymenaeus, the son of Apollo and the muse Urania, presided over marriage and nuptial ceremonies, invoked at all wedding festivities. There is a gentle myth about a divine being named Hymen. He was a beautiful youth, born to very poor parents. Hymen fell deeply in love with a wealthy maiden, so far above him in rank, that he dared not even dream of uniting with her. Yet he never missed a chance to see her. One day, he disguised himself as a girl, and joined a group of maidens traveling from Athens to Eleusis. They were on their way to a festival of Demeter. As they journeyed, pirates surprised them and carried them off to a deserted island. The ruffians, after drinking deeply, soon fell into a heavy sleep. Hymen seized this precious opportunity and bravely slew them all. Then he set sail for Athens, where he found the parents of the maidens in great distress over their mysterious disappearance. He comforted them, promising that their children would be returned if they would agree to give him the maiden he loved in marriage. They gladly complied, and Hymen returned to the island, bringing the maidens back safely to Athens. In that moment, he was united with the object of his love, and their union was so remarkably happy that from then on, the name of Hymen became synonymous with conjugal bliss. Now let us speak of Iris, the rainbow. Iris was the daughter of Thaumas and Electra, and she personified the rainbow. She was the special attendant and messenger of the Queen of Heaven, executing her commands with grace, intelligence, and swiftness. Primitive nations viewed the rainbow as a bridge between heaven and earth. This is why Iris, who embodied this beautiful phenomenon of nature, was chosen by the Greeks to communicate between gods and men. Iris is often depicted seated behind the chariot of Hera, ready to fulfill her royal mistress's wishes. She appears as a slender maiden of great beauty, robed in airy fabrics of variegated hues, reminiscent of mother of pearl. Her sandals shine like burnished silver, and she has golden wings. Wherever she goes, a radiant light and a sweet fragrance, like delicate spring flowers, fill the air. Next, we have Hebe, the personification of eternal youth. Hebe was the daughter of Zeus and Hera, and although of such noble lineage, she served as the cupbearer to the gods. This reflects the old custom where daughters, even of the highest rank, assisted in serving guests. Hebe is portrayed as a modest maiden, small and beautifully rounded, with nut-brown hair and sparkling eyes. She is often seen pouring nectar from an upraised vessel or holding a shallow dish, believed to contain ambrosia, the food that renews youth for the immortals. But one day, in a moment of awkwardness, she slipped while serving the gods, and lost her position, which was then given to Ganymedes, the son of Tros. Later, Hebe became the bride of Heracles, after he was welcomed among the immortals. Now let's speak of Juventas. Juventas was the Roman goddess identified with Hebe. The Romans viewed her attributes as reflecting the everlasting vigor and immortal glory of the state. In Rome, several temples were built in her honor. Then there is Ganymedes, the youngest son of Tros, king of Troy. One day, while drawing water from a well on Mount Ida, he caught the eye of Zeus. Struck by Ganymedes' beauty, Zeus sent his eagle to carry him to Olympus, where he was granted immortality and became the cupbearer to the gods. Ganymedes is depicted as a youth of exquisite beauty, with short golden locks, delicate features, bright blue eyes, and soft, pouting lips. Now let us turn to the Muses. Of all the Olympic deities, none hold a more distinguished place than the Muses, the 9 beautiful daughters of Zeus and Mnemosyne. Originally, they presided over music, song, and dance. But as civilization progressed, the arts and sciences claimed their own divine guardians. The Muses began to share their gifts, overseeing poetry, astronomy, and more. They were honored by both mortals and immortals. In Olympus, where Apollo led them, no banquet or festivity felt complete without their joyful presence. On Earth, no gathering was celebrated without offerings made to them. No intellectual endeavor was begun without a heartfelt plea for their assistance. The Muses bestowed knowledge, wisdom, and understanding upon their chosen favorites. They gifted the orator with eloquence, inspired the poet with noble thoughts, and filled the musician with sweet harmonies. Yet, like many Greek divinities, the Muses were quick to punish those who dared to rival them. One such tale involves Thamyris, a Thracian bard, who challenged them to a contest. After defeating him, they not only blinded him but also took away his gift of song. Another story tells of the daughters of King Pyrrhus, who, proud of their musical skills, dared to challenge the Muses. Their contest took place on Mount Helicon. As the mortal maidens began to sing, the sky darkened, But when the Muses raised their heavenly voices, all of nature rejoiced. The Pierides were defeated and transformed into singing birds, a punishment for their audacity. Undeterred, the Sirens also entered a similar contest. The Muses sang with loyalty and truth, while the Sirens lured sailors to their doom with deceptive melodies. The Muses triumphed, and as a mark of their humiliation, the Sirens lost the beautiful feathers that adorned their bodies. The oldest seat of worship for the Muses was Pieria in Thrace, where they were believed to have first seen the light of day. Pieria, nestled on the slopes of Mount Olympus, is where sweet, soothing sounds flow from rivulets, perhaps inspiring this place as a fitting home for the divine presiders of song. They dwelt on the summits of Mounts Helicon, Parnassus, and Pindus, loving to haunt the springs and fountains, which gushed forth amidst these rocky heights. All of these places were sacred to them and to poetic inspiration. Aganippe and Hippocrene on Mount Helicon, and the Castalian Spring on Mount Parnassus, were especially revered by the Muses. The Castalian Spring flowed gently between two lofty rocks above the ancient city of Delphi. In times long past, its waters were gathered into a square stone basin for the use of the Pythia and the priests of Apollo. The offerings to these divine beings consisted of water, milk, and honey, but never of wine. Their names and functions are as follows. Calliope, the most honored of the Muses, presided over heroic song and epic poetry. She is often depicted with a pencil in her hand and a slate resting upon her knee. Clio, the Muse of History, holds a roll of parchment in her hand and wears a lovely wreath of laurel. Melpomene, the Muse of Tragedy, bears a tragic mask, while Talia, the Muse of Comedy, carries a shepherd's crook in her right hand with a comic mask beside her. Polyhymnia, the Muse of Sacred Hymns, is crowned with a wreath of laurel, always depicted in a thoughtful pose, enveloped in rich folds of drapery. Terpsichore, the Muse of Dance and Roundelay, is shown playing on a seven-stringed lyre. Urania, the Muse of Astronomy, stands tall, bearing a celestial globe in her left hand. Euterpe, the Muse of Harmony, is often seen with a musical instrument, usually a flute. Erato, the Muse of Love and Hymeneal songs, wears a wreath of laurel, striking the chords of a lyre. As for the origin of the Muses, it is said that they were created by Zeus, in response to a request from the victorious deities. After the war with the Titans, they desired special divinities to commemorate in song the glorious deeds of the Olympian gods. Pegasus was a beautiful winged horse, born from the body of Medusa when she was slain by the hero Perseus, the son of Zeus and Danae. Spreading his magnificent wings, he flew to the top of Mount Olympus, where he was welcomed with delight by all the immortals. Zeus assigned him a place in his palace, employing him to carry his thunder and lightning. Pegasus allowed none but the gods to mount him, except for Bellerophon, whom, at the command of Athene, he carried aloft to slay the chimera with his arrows. Later poets depicted Pegasus as being at the service of the Muses, which is why he is more celebrated now than in ancient times. He symbolizes poetic inspiration that encourages the soul to soar heavenward. The ancients spoke of Pegasus in connection with the Muses, telling of how he struck the ground with his hooves, and from that moment, the famous fountain Hippocrene gushed forth. During their contest with the Pierides, the Muses sang and played on the summit of Mount Helicon with such extraordinary power and sweetness that heaven and earth stood still to listen. The mountain raised itself in joyous joy, yearning for the abode of the celestial gods. Poseidon, noticing his domain disturbed, sent Pegasus to quell the mountain's boldness. When Pegasus reached the summit, he stamped the ground with his hooves, and out gushed the waters of Hippocrene, the sacred fount from which the Muses quaffed their richest draughts of inspiration. The Hesperides, the daughters of Atlas, dwelt in an island in the far west, from which they derived their name. They were appointed by Hera to guard a tree bearing golden apples, a gift from Gaia on her marriage to Zeus. It is said that the Hesperides, unable to resist the temptation of tasting the golden fruit, were stripped of their duty. This task was then given to the fearsome dragon Ladon, who became the vigilant sentinel of these precious treasures. The names of the Hesperides were Egli, Arethusa, and Hesperia. Charites, or Graces, were personified by the Greeks as three lovely sisters, Euphrosyne, Aglaia, and Talia, the daughters of Zeus and Eurynomy, or, according to later writers, of Dionysus and Aphrodite. They are depicted as beautiful, slender maidens in the full bloom of youth, with hands and arms lovingly intertwined. They may be undraped or wear a light, ethereal garment. They embody every gentle emotion of the heart, expressing friendship and benevolence. The Graces preside over qualities such as grace, modesty, innocent joy, and purity of mind and body. They not only possessed perfect beauty, but also bestowed this gift upon others. All the joys of life were heightened by their presence, and deemed incomplete without them. Wherever joy or pleasure reigned, there they were believed to be present. Temples and altars were erected in their honor, and people of all ages sought their favor. Incense was burned daily upon their altars, and at every banquet they were invoked, with a libation poured out to them. The Graces not only enhanced enjoyment, but also moderated the effects of wine, music, eloquence, poetry, and art, though the work of the Muses received an added touch of beauty from the Graces. Thus they were always regarded as friends of the Muses, with whom they lived on Mount Olympus. Their special role was to accompany the seasons, serving Aphrodite, adorned with wreaths of flowers. She emerged from their hands, like the queen of spring, perfumed with the scent of roses, violets, and all sweet blossoms. The Graces often attended other divinities, carrying music for Apollo, myrtles for Aphrodite, and frequently accompanying the Muses. Eros or Dionysus, Ori or Seasons, were closely allied to the Graces. They were also represented as three beautiful maidens, daughters of Zeus and Themis. Their names were Eunomia, Dice, and Irene. It may seem curious that these divine beings, who oversee the seasons, are only three in number. Yet, this aligns perfectly with the beliefs of the ancient Greeks. They recognized only spring, summer, and autumn as true seasons, while winter was thought to be a time when nature lay in death or deep slumber. In some regions of Greece, there were just two Ori: Thallo, the goddess of blooming flowers, and Carpo, the goddess of corn and fruit. The Ori are always seen as friendly to humanity, pure and without deceit. They are depicted as joyous, gentle maidens, crowned with flowers, holding hands in a round dance. When shown separately, each represents a different season. The aura of spring is adorned with blossoms. The summer aura carries a sheaf of corn, while the autumn aura cradles clusters of grapes and other fruits. They often appear alongside the Graces, in the company of Aphrodite, and are seen with Apollo and the Muses. These graceful maidens are deeply connected to all that is good and beautiful in nature. The regular cycle of the seasons, like all of nature's rhythms, requires perfect order and harmony. As daughters of Themis, the Ori embody this order and the fair administration of human affairs in civilized societies. Each sister has her own role. Eunomia oversees state life, Dice protects individual interests, and Irene, the brightest and most cheerful, is the lively companion of Dionysus. The Ori also govern the swift passage of time, presiding over both the small moments and the grand divisions of time. Each morning, they help yoke the celestial horses to the radiant chariot of the sun, and at day's end, they assist in unyoking it, as the sun sinks into a peaceful rest. Originally, they were seen as personifications of clouds, described as opening and closing the gates of heaven, bringing forth fruits and flowers. as they shower the earth with their life-giving streams. The nymphs, those graceful beings, are the divine guardians of woods, grottos, streams, and meadows. They are envisioned as beautiful maidens, fairy-like in form, draped in ethereal garments. Though they are minor deities, they are held in great reverence. Lacking temples, they are worshipped in caves and grottos, with offerings of milk, honey, and oil. Nymphs can be divided into three distinct classes: water nymphs, mountain nymphs, and tree nymphs. The water nymphs, including oceanides, nereides, and naiads, are revered across many ancient cultures. The streams, springs, and fountains of a land are akin to the blood flowing through a body, representing the vital, life-giving essence essential for existence. Thus, many tribes cherished their local waters, seeing them as benevolent forces, bestowing blessings and prosperity. The soothing sounds of running water enchanted their imaginations, the gentle whisper of a fountain, the soft purling of a brook over pebbles, and the mighty roar of a waterfall. The beings they envisioned presiding over these enchanting sights mirrored the beauty of nature itself. The oceanides, or ocean nymphs, are the daughters of Oceanus and Tethys. Like many sea deities, they possess the gift of prophecy. They embody delicate, vapor-like exhalations, rising from the sea's surface, especially at sunset, carried by the evening breeze. They are depicted as misty, shadowy figures with graceful, swaying forms, clothed in pale blue, gauzy fabrics. The nereides, daughters of Nereus and Doris, are nymphs of the Mediterranean Sea. They resemble the oceanides but possess a more earthly beauty. Clad in flowing, pale green robes, their eyes reflect the clear depths of the sea, and their hair flows freely, taking on the greenish hue of the water. This only enhances their beauty. The nereides either accompany the mighty ruler of the sea or follow in his wake. Poets tell of lonely sailors who watch the nereides with awe as they rise from their grotto palaces, dancing joyfully over the tranquil waves. Some entwine their arms, moving in harmony with melodies that seem to float above the sea, while others scatter liquid gems around them, reminiscent of the phosphorescent light seen at night in southern waters. Among the best-known nereides are Thetis, wife of Peleus, Amphitrite, spouse of Poseidon, and Galatea, beloved of Acis. The naiads are the nymphs of freshwater springs, lakes, brooks, and rivers. They are seen as special benefactors to mankind, nurturing the trees, plants, and flowers with their care. Like all nymphs, they possess the gift of prophecy, and many springs are believed to inspire those who drink from them, granting the ability to foresee future events. The naiads are closely associated with the water lilies, known as nymphae, whose broad, green leaves and yellow cups float gracefully on the water's surface. Stories abound of naiads forming bonds with mortals and being courted by the woodland deities of the forests and glades. The dryads, or tree nymphs, embody the unique qualities of the trees they are linked to. Together, they are known as the dryads. The hamadryads, or oak nymphs, represent the quiet, self-reliant strength of the grand and noble king of the forest. The birch nymph is a gentle, melancholy maiden. Her hair floats softly, like the delicate branches of the pale tree she calls home. The beech nymph, in contrast, is strong and vibrant. She radiates life and joy, promising faithful love and peaceful rest. Her rosy cheeks and deep brown eyes reflect health and vitality, while her graceful form dances with energy. The nymph of the linden tree is a shy, coy maiden. Her short silver-gray dress falls just below her knees, highlighting her delicately formed limbs. With a sweet face turned slightly away, her large blue eyes gaze at you, filled with wonder and a hint of mistrust. Pale, golden hair is bound with a delicate ribbon, a whisper of rose color. These tree nymphs are bound to the trees they inhabit. When the trees are felled or wither away, so too do they cease to exist. In the valleys and mountains we find the nymphae and oreads. The nymphae are kind and gentle, lovely maidens in short tunics that allow them to move gracefully. Their pale brown hair is tied back, with a few playful curls escaping over their shoulders. They are as shy as fawns, and just as frolicsome. The Oreads, mountain nymphs and constant companions of Artemis, are tall and graceful, dressed as huntresses. They chase after gentle deer and timid hares, with the Napii hiding shyly behind the leaves, while fawns kneel beside them, seeking protection from the wild huntresses. Even the bold satyrs flee at their approach, seeking safety in the shadows. Among them is the tale of Echo, a mountain nymph who fell in love with Narcissus, the beautiful son of the river god Cephissus. But Narcissus did not return her love. Heartbroken, she pined away, until only her voice remained, echoing every sound in the hills and dales. Narcissus, too, faced a tragic fate, as Aphrodite caused him to fall in love with his own reflection, wasting away until he transformed into the flower that bears his name. The Limoniades, or meadow nymphs, dance hand in joyful circles, while the Hyades, resembling the Oceanides, are cloud-like divinities, always accompanied by rain, their eyes filled with tears. The Meliades are the nymphs of fruit trees, bringing sweetness and life to the orchards. In modern times, this enchanting idea of nature's spirits lives on in local traditions around the world. The Oceanides and Nereides have transformed into mermaids, believed in by sailors lost at sea, while flower and meadow nymphs have become tiny elves and fairies, holding midnight revels in the woods. Even today, the Irish believe in the good people, the fairies who dance in the moonlight. As for the winds, Aeolus, the king of the Aeolian Islands, was given command over them by Zeus. He kept the winds locked away in a deep cave, releasing them at his will or at the god's command. In time, the winds became distinct divinities, winged youths soaring through the air. Boreas, the north wind; Eurus, the east wind; Zephyrus, the west wind; and Notus, the south wind, children of Eos and Astraeus. Though their stories are few, Zephyrus united with Chloris, the goddess of flowers. Boreas, while flying over the river Ilissus, spotted the lovely Oreithyia, daughter of Erechtheus, king of Athens. He carried her away to Thrace, where she became his bride. Together they had Zets and Calais, famous in the tales of the Argonauts. An altar was built in Athens for Boreas, in honor of his victory over the Persian fleet. And on the Acropolis stood a grand octagonal temple, dedicated to the winds, its ruins whispering stories of the past. Pan, the god of Frtlty, patron of shepherds and huntsmen, presided over all rural life. He was the chief of the satyrs, born of Hermes and a wood nymph, with horns sprouting from his forehead, a goat's beard, and a crooked nose. His appearance was so startling that his mother fled in fear. Yet Hermes embraced him, wrapping him in a hare skin, carrying him to Olympus. His playful antics won the hearts of the immortals, especially Dionysus, who named him Pan, for he delighted them all. His favorite places were the grottos, where he wandered freely over rocks and mountains. With a heart full of joy, he followed his many pursuits, often filled with laughter and music. He adored singing, dancing, and all the pleasures that life has to offer. Despite his unusual appearance, he was surrounded by nymphs of the forests and dales. They loved to dance around him to the cheerful melodies of his pipe, the syrinx. The story of Pan's pipe begins with a beautiful nymph named Syrinx. Pan fell deeply in love with her, but she was frightened by his fearsome looks. In her desperation, she fled from his persistent advances, running to the banks of the river Ladon. As Pan drew near, she felt escape was impossible. In a moment of prayer, she called upon the gods for help. In response, they transformed her into a reed, just as Pan was about to catch her. Heartbroken, Pan sighed and lamented his loss. As the gentle winds swayed the reeds, they produced a soft, murmuring sound, like a voice in sorrow. Captivated by the soothing tones, Pan sought to recreate them. He cut 7 reeds of different lengths and joined them together, crafting the pipe he named Syrinx, in memory of his lost love. To the shepherds, Pan was a brave protector, guarding their flocks from the wolves. In those early days, shepherds had no pens. They gathered their sheep in mountain caves, to shield them from storms and wild beasts at night. These caves, scattered throughout the mountains of Arcadia and Boeotia, were dedicated to Pan. In the heat of the day, it was customary to rest. Pan was often depicted enjoying his afternoon slumber in the cool shade of a tree or cave. He would become quite displeased with any noise that disturbed his dreams. So the shepherds kept a respectful silence, while they indulged in their own quiet siestas. Huntsmen also cherished Pan, for he loved the woods, where his lively spirit roamed freely. He was the patron of the chase, and when hunters returned empty-handed, they would strike the wooden image of Pan, a symbol of their frustration. Mysterious sounds that startled travelers in lonely places were often attributed to Pan. He was known for his fearsome and discordant voice, giving rise to the term panic terror. The Athenians believed their victory at Marathon was due to the alarm he caused among the Persians with his terrible voice. Pan was gifted with the power of prophecy, which he shared with Apollo. He had a well-known oracle in Arcadia, where he was especially revered. Artists in later times softened Pan's original, unappealing image. They depicted him as a young man, weathered by rural life, holding a shepherd's crook and syrinx, his familiar symbols. He often wore a light cloak called the chlamys, with small horns peeking from his forehead. The usual offerings to Pan were milk and honey, poured into shepherds' bowls. Cows, lambs, and rams were also sacrificed in his honor. With the introduction of Pan into the worship of Dionysus, tales emerged of little Pans, known as Panissi, sometimes confused with the satyrs. The Romans had their own ancient deity named Faunus, a god of shepherds, who was closely linked to the Greek Pan. Faunus was often called Inuus, the fertilizer, or Lupercus, the protector against wolves. Like Pan, he had the gift of prophecy, and was the spirit of the woods and fields. He too could startle travelers in solitary places. Bad dreams and evil spirits were attributed to Faunus, who was believed to sneak into homes at night. Fauna, his wife, shared in his divine duties. The satyrs were woodland spirits, embodying the wild, free life of the forest. Their appearance was both strange and comical, with flat noses, pointed ears, and little horns sprouting from their foreheads. They had rough, shaggy skin and small goat tails. Living lives of pleasure and indulgence, they reveled in the chase and danced to wild music. They were notorious for their love of wine and the deep slumbers that followed. Even the gentle woodland nymphs avoided their coarse antics, for they were as feared by mortals as they were by the nymphs. The satyrs were often seen in the company of Dionysus, with Silenus, their chief, serving as the wine god's tutor. Older satyrs were known as Silens, depicted in ancient sculptures with more human-like features. Artists also loved to portray little satyrs, frolicking in the woods with playful antics, resembling their companions, the Panissi. During the festivals of Dionysus, shepherds and peasants would dress in animal skins, allowing themselves to indulge in playful tricks and excesses. This tradition may have inspired the CNCPTN of the satyrs. In Rome, the old Italian wood divinities, the fauns, were identified with the satyrs, sharing their goat-like features and wild nature. Priapus, the son of Dionysus and Aphrodite, was seen as the god of fruitfulness. He protected flocks, sheep, goats, bees, the fruit of the vine, and all garden produce. His statues, placed in gardens and vineyards, served not only as objects of worship, but also as scarecrows. The appearance of this god was particularly repulsive and unsightly. These statues were crafted from wood or stone, and from the hips downwards they were simply rough columns. They depicted him with a red, very ugly face. In one hand, he held a pruning knife, and his head was crowned with a wreath of vine and laurel. He often carried fruit in his garments or a cornucopia in his hand. Yet he always retained his singularly revolting aspect. It is said that Hera, wishing to punish Aphrodite, sent her this misshapen and unsightly son. When he was born, his mother was so horrified at the sight of him that she ordered him to be exposed on the mountains. There he was found by some shepherds, who, taking pity on him, saved his life. This divinity was chiefly worshipped at Lampsacus, his birthplace. Buttes were sacrificed to him, and he received the first fruits of the fields and gardens, along with a libation of milk and honey. The worship of Priapus found its way into Rome at the same time as that of Aphrodite, and was identified with a native Italian divinity named Mutunus. Asclepius, the god of the healing art, was the son of Apollo and the nymph Caronis. He was educated by the noble centaur Chiron, who taught him all knowledge, especially the properties of herbs. Asclepius searched out the hidden powers of plants, discovering cures for the various diseases that afflict the human body. He perfected his art to such a degree that he not only warded off death, but also restored the dead to life. It was popularly believed that he was aided in his wonderful cures by the blood of Medusa, given to him by Pallas Athene. The shrines of this divinity were usually built in healthy places, on hills outside the town, or near wells believed to have healing powers. They offered means of cure for the sick and suffering, combining religious with sanitary influences. It was customary for the sufferer to sleep in the temple. If earnest in their devotions, Asclepius would appear in a dream, revealing the means to cure their malady. On the walls of these temples hung tablets, inscribed by pilgrims with details of their maladies, the remedies practiced, and the cures worked by the god, a custom undoubtedly productive of most beneficial results. Groves, temples, and altars were dedicated to Asclepius in many parts of Greece. Yet, Epidaurus, the chief seat of his worship, where it is said to have originated, contained his principal temple, which also served as a hospital. The statue of Asclepius in the temple at Epidaurus was made of ivory and gold. It depicted him as an old man with a full beard, leaning on a staff around which a serpent was climbing. The serpent was the distinguishing symbol of this divinity, partly because these reptiles were greatly used by the ancients in the cure of diseases, and partly because all the prudence and wisdom of the serpent were deemed essential to a judicious physician. His usual attributes included a staff, a bowl, a bunch of herbs, a pineapple, a dog, and a serpent. His children inherited the distinguished talents of their father. Two of his sons, Machaon and Podalirius, accompanied Agamemnon to the Trojan War. In that expedition, they became renowned not only as military heroes, but also as skilled physicians. Their sisters, Hygeia, Health, and Panacea, all healing, had temples dedicated to them, receiving divine honors. The role of Hygeia was to maintain the health of the community, a great blessing believed to be a direct gift from the gods. The worship of Asclepius was introduced into Rome from Epidaurus. The statue of the god of healing was brought during a great pestilence. Grateful for their deliverance from this plague, the Romans erected a temple in his honor on an island near the mouth of the Tiber. From the earliest ages, Janus was regarded by the Romans with utmost affection and veneration. He was a divinity who ranked only second to Jupiter himself, through whom all prayers and petitions were transmitted to the other gods. He presided over the beginnings of all things, inaugurating the years, months, and seasons. Over time, he became known for protecting the beginnings of all human enterprises. The great importance the Romans placed on an auspicious start, contributing to the ultimate success of an endeavor, explains the high regard in which Janus was held as the god of beginnings. This divinity appears to have been the ancient sun god of the Italian tribes. In this role, he opened and closed the gates of heaven every morning and evening. Thus, he was seen as the doorkeeper of heaven, and the presiding deity over all gates and entrances on earth. His connection to city gates, called Iani after him, is linked to a myth. After the abduction of their women by the Romans, the Sabines invaded the Roman state, preparing to enter the city gates. Suddenly, a hot sulfur spring, believed to have been sent by Janus for their protection, gushed forth from the earth, halting the enemy's advance. As guardian of gates and doors, he was also viewed as a protective deity of the home. Little shrines were erected over the doors of houses, containing an image of the god with two faces. Janus possessed no temples in the usual sense. All city gates were dedicated to him. Close to the Forum of Rome stood the so-called Temple of Janus, which was merely an arched passage, closed by massive gates. This temple opened only in times of war, as it was believed that the god had departed with the Roman army, over whose welfare he presided. It is notable that the gates of this sanctuary were closed only 3 times during 700 years, a testament to the many wars in which the Romans were engaged. As the god who ushers in the new year, the first month was named after him. On the 1st of January, his most important festival was celebrated. On this occasion, all entrances of public and private buildings were adorned with laurel branches and garlands of flowers. His sacrifices of cakes, wine, and barley were offered to him at the beginning of every month. Before honoring the other gods, his name was always invoked, and a libation poured out for him. Janus is often depicted with 2 faces. In his role as the doorkeeper of heaven, he stands tall, holding a key in one hand and a rod or scepter in the other. It is believed that Janus was the most ancient king of Italy. During his life, he governed his people with wisdom and moderation. In gratitude for his many benefits, they deified him after his death, placing him among their greatest divinities. We have seen in the tale of Cronus that Saturn, who was identified with the Greek Cronus, the god of time, was a friend and colleague of Janus. Eager to show his gratitude, Cronus gifted him with the knowledge of past and future events. This wisdom allowed Janus to make the best choices for the welfare of his subjects. That is why he is represented with 2 faces, one looking back to the past, and the other gazing forward to the future. Flora was the goddess of flowers, a benevolent spirit who watched over and protected the early blossoms. The Romans held her in the highest esteem. They celebrated a festival called the Floralia, from the 28th of April to the 1st of May. This joyful time was filled with merriment, where flowers adorned houses and streets, and young girls wore them in their hair. Flora, embodying the spirit of spring, is often portrayed as a lovely maiden, crowned with flowers. In contrast to Flora, there was Robigus, a divinity of mischief who delighted in destroying tender herbs with mildew. His wrath could only be averted through prayers and sacrifices. When invoked, he was known as Avarunkus or the Averter. The festival of Robigus, called the Robigalia, was celebrated on the 25th of April. Pomona was the goddess of orchards and fruit trees. According to Ovid, she cared little for woods or streams, but cherished her gardens and the boughs heavy with fruit. Pomona, symbolizing autumn, is depicted as a beautiful maiden, adorned with branches of fruit. Vertumnus was the god of garden and field produce. He personified the changing seasons, the transformation in nature, where leaf buds blossom into flowers and flowers turn into fruit. In a myth, Vertumnus transformed himself into many forms to win Pomona's heart. First, he appeared as a plowman, representing spring. Then as a reaper, symbolizing summer. Next, he became a vine gatherer, embodying autumn. Finally, he transformed into a gray-haired old woman, representing the snows of winter. It was only when he revealed his true form, as a handsome youth, that he succeeded in winning her affection. Vertumnus is often shown crowned with wheat sheaves, holding a cornucopia in his hand. Pales, an ancient Italian divinity, is sometimes depicted as male, and sometimes as female. As a male, he is the god of shepherds and flocks. As a female deity, Pales oversees husbandry and the fertility of herds. Her festivals, the Palilia, were celebrated on the 21st of April, the day Rome was founded. During this festival, shepherds would light a mass of straw, rushing through it with their flocks, believing it would purify them from sin. The name Palatine, originally meaning a pastoral colony, comes from this divinity. Her offerings were cakes and milk. Picus, the son of Saturn and father of Faunus, was a woodland divinity, gifted with prophetic powers. An ancient myth tells of Picus, a beautiful youth, who loved a nymph named Canons. The sorceress Circe, captivated by his beauty, tried to win his love. When he rejected her, she transformed him into a woodpecker. Yet, even in this form, he retained his powers of prophecy. Picus is often depicted as a youth with a woodpecker perched upon his head, a bird now seen as a symbol of prophecy. Picumnus and Palumnus were two household divinities of the Romans, presiding over newborn infants. Silvanus was a woodland divinity, much like Faunus, resembling the Greek Pan. He was the protector of plantations and forests, safeguarding the boundaries of fields. Silvanus is portrayed as a robust old man, carrying a cypress tree. In Roman mythology, the transformation of the youth Cyparissus into the tree bearing his name was attributed to him. His offerings included milk, meat, wine, grapes, wheat ears, and pigs. Terminus was the god of boundaries and landmarks. Initially represented by a simple block of stone, this later evolved into a statue with a head. Numa Pompilius, a great benefactor of his people, emphasized respect for property rights by acting these stone markers. He also established altars for Terminus and instituted his festival, the Terminalia, celebrated on the 23rd of February. Once, when Tarquin wished to remove the altars of several deities to build a new temple, only Terminus and Juventus objected. Their refusal was seen as a good omen, a sign that Rome would never lose her boundaries, and would remain forever young and vibrant. Consus was the god of secret counsel. The Romans believed that when a spontaneous idea blossomed in someone's mind, it was Consus who had inspired it. An altar was built for him at the Circus Maximus, always covered, except during his festival, the Consualia, celebrated on the 18th of August. Libitina was the goddess who presided over funerals. This divinity was associated with Venus, perhaps because the ancients believed that the power of love extended even into the realms of death. Her temple in Rome, built by Servius Tullius, served as a place for all funeral needs. Here, one could buy or hire everything necessary for a proper farewell. A record of every death in the city was kept within these sacred walls. To keep track of mortality, a small coin was paid upon the passing of each soul, as commanded by Servius Tullius. Laverna, the goddess of thieves, and all things crafty and deceitful. An altar was dedicated to her near the Porta Lavernalis, named in her honor. She also had a sacred grove along the Via Salavia, a place where whispers of secrets lingered in the air. Comus, the spirit of banquets and revelry, embodied joy and carefree pleasures. He is often depicted as a young man, crowned with flowers, his cheeks flushed from wine. Leaning against a post, he appears half asleep, a torch slipping from his hand, a symbol of indulgence and merriment. The Camini were revered prophetic nymphs, cherished by the ancient Italians. There were 4 of them, with Carmenta and Egeria being the most well-known. Carmenta, celebrated as the mother of Evander, led an Arcadian colony into Italy. She founded a town by the river Tiber, which later became part of Rome. Evander is remembered for introducing Greek art and the worship of Greek gods to Italy. On the Capitoline Hill, a temple was built for Carmenta. Each year, on the 11th of January, a festival called the Carmentalia was held in her honor. Egeria, on the other hand, guided Numa Pompilius in the ways of religious worship, bringing sacred practices to his people. She was seen as a giver of life, often invoked by women before the arrival of their children. The Camini are frequently linked to the Muses in Roman writings. A comforting belief surrounded the Romans, that each person was accompanied by a protecting spirit called their genius. This spirit guided them towards good deeds, acting like a guardian angel, offering comfort in sorrow, and guiding them through life's journey. Over time, a second, darker genius was thought to exist, an evil force that tempted individuals towards wrongdoing. The struggle between these two spirits determined the fate of each person. The genii were often depicted as winged beings, resembling our modern guardian angels. Every state, town, and city, as well as every individual, had its own special genius. Sacrifices of wine, cakes, and incense were offered to them on birthdays. The genius that guided a woman was named after Juno, the Queen of Heaven. Similarly, the Greeks spoke of demons, spirits believed to watch over humanity, carrying prayers to the gods and delivering divine gifts in return. The manes were the spirits of the departed, divided into two kinds, lemurs and laras. The lemurs were the restless spirits, haunting their former homes as malevolent beings. They appeared at night, taking on frightening forms, causing fear among their loved ones. To appease them, a festival called the Lemuralia was celebrated. The laras familiars, however, were a more comforting presence. They were the spirits of ancestors, watching over their families, ensuring their well-being and prosperity. A statue of the family lar held a place of honor beside the hearth. This statue was revered by all family members, receiving a portion of each meal. It was believed to take part in family matters, both joyful and sorrowful. Before embarking on any journey, the head of the household would greet the lar, and upon returning, a solemn thanksgiving was offered, often adorned with garlands of flowers, a favorite tribute during family celebrations. The first act of a bride entering her new home was to honor the lar, seeking protection and shielding from harm. In addition to family laras, public laras existed as guardians of the state, roads, countryside, and sea. Their temples welcomed any pious worshipper, and public sacrifices were offered for the welfare of the community. The Penates were chosen deities, selected by each family, or even by individual members as special protectors. A child born on the festival of Vesta would have that goddess as their guardian. A young person with business talents might adopt Mercury, while one with a passion for music would choose Apollo. These deities became the household's cherished protectors, their small images gracing the hearth, receiving honors akin to those given to the laras. Just as there were public laras, there were also public penates, worshipped by the Roman people in the form of two youthful warriors. In later times, they were identified with Castor and Pollux, often depicted on horseback, wearing conical caps and wielding long spears. In very remote times, the Greeks had no shrines or sanctuaries for public worship. They offered their devotions beneath the vast and boundless canopy of heaven, in the great temple of nature itself. Believing their divinities throned above the clouds, pious worshippers sought the highest points, to be as close as possible to their gods. Thus, the summits of high mountains became sacred sites. The more exalted the divinity, the higher the place chosen for worship. Yet, the inconvenience of this mode of worship led to the idea of building structures to provide shelter from the weather. Initially, these temples were simple and unadorned, but as civilization progressed, the Greeks became wealthy and powerful. Temples were constructed with great splendor, adorned with talent, labor, and wealth. Some were built so robustly that they have withstood the ravages of time. The city of Athens, especially, holds numerous remains of these ancient buildings. On the Acropolis, we can still behold the Temple of Athene Polias and the Temple of Theseus, the most complete ancient edifice in the world. In the island of Delos, the ruins of the temples of Apollo and Artemis stand in remarkable preservation. These ruins are invaluable, allowing us to study the original structure's plans and character. Among the Lacedaemonians, however, no grand temples remain. They followed a law by Lycurgus to serve the gods with minimal expense. When asked why, he explained that, being a poor nation, they might otherwise neglect their religious duties. He wisely added that true piety and devotion pleased the gods more than magnificent edifices and costly sacrifices. The most ancient temples served a dual purpose. They were consecrated to the gods, and also honored the dead. For instance, the Temple of Pallas Athene in Larissa served as the sepulchre of Acrisius. The Acropolis at Athens received the ashes of Cecrops, the city's founder. Temples were often dedicated to multiple gods, built in ways deemed most acceptable to those divinities. Just as trees, birds, and animals were sacred to certain deities, each god had a preferred architectural style. The Doric style honored Zeus, Ares, and Heracles. The Ionic was for Apollo, Artemis, and Dionysus, while the Corinthian style was sacred to Hestia. In the temple's porch, a vessel of stone or brass held holy water, consecrated by a burning torch from the altar. Those who participated in the sacrifices were sprinkled with this water. The innermost sanctuary was the most sacred place, accessible only to the priests. Temples in the countryside were often surrounded by groves of trees. The solitude of these shady retreats inspired awe and reverence. The delightful shade and coolness of tall, leafy trees brought comfort in hot climates. This custom became so widespread that all sacred places, even without trees, were called groves. The ancient practice is echoed in the biblical injunction, aimed at separating the Jews from idolatrous practices. Thou shalt not plant thee a grove of trees near unto the altar of the Lord thy God. The Greeks worshipped their gods without visible representations until the time of sea crops. The earliest representations were simple square blocks of stone, engraved with the deity's name. Early sculptures were rudimentary, with a head atop a shapeless trunk, tapering down to feet that were not defined. But later artists poured their genius into creating the highest ideals of their gods. Many of these masterpieces are preserved today, celebrated as purest art. In the center of the temple stood the statue of the divinity to whom it was dedicated, surrounded by images of other gods, all enclosed by rails. The altar in a Greek temple, positioned in front of the statue of the presiding deity, was generally circular and made of stone. It was customary to engrave the name or symbol of the divinity upon it. This altar was sacred, a refuge for those seeking safety. To force someone from this sanctuary was considered a grave sacrilege. The most ancient altars were adorned with horns, once symbols of power and dignity, representing wealth and importance among primitive nations. In addition to those in public worship places, altars were often raised in groves, along highways, or in city marketplaces. The gods of the lower world had no altars. Instead, ditches or trenches received the blood of sacrifices offered to them. In ancient times, priests formed a special social caste. They were distinguished by their sacred vestments, as well as their piety, wisdom, and blameless lives. They acted as mediators between gods and men, offering prayers and sacrifices on behalf of the people. They guided worshippers on what vows, gifts, and offerings would be most pleasing to the gods. Every deity had a unique order of priests dedicated to their worship. In every place, a high priest was appointed to oversee the others, carrying out the most sacred rites and religious observances. Priests and priestesses could marry, but only once. Some chose to embrace a life of celibacy, seeking a deeper connection with the divine. Sacrifices were a way to express gratitude to the gods who watched over them. People from all walks of life felt a longing to offer something back, a small token of appreciation for the blessings bestowed upon them. Among the Greeks, sacrifices took many forms. There were free will offerings, given freely in thanks, often the first fruits of the harvest, or the finest animals from their flocks, pure and unblemished. Then there were propitiatory offerings, meant to soothe the anger of the gods. Other sacrifices were made to seek success in new ventures, or to fulfill a vow, or at the command of an oracle. Each sacrifice was accompanied by salt and a libation, usually wine, poured generously into a cup, filled to the brim, symbolizing a bountiful offering. When honoring the gods of the underworld, the libation was filled with blood. The animals offered to the Olympian gods were white, while those for the gods below were black. When a man made a special sacrifice for himself or his family, it reflected his occupation. A shepherd would bring a sheep, a vine grower his grapes. In public sacrifices, the nature of the deity was always considered. For Demeter, a sow was offered, as it was known to root up the seed corn. For Dionysus, a goat was chosen, for its penchant to destroy vineyards. The value of offerings varied greatly. A rich man bringing a meager gift was seen as disrespectful, while even the smallest offering from a poor man was cherished. Hecatombs, grand sacrifices of 100 animals, were made by entire communities or wealthy individuals seeking special favor from the gods. When a sacrifice was to take place, a fire was kindled on the altar. Wine and frankincense were poured in to enhance the flames. In ancient times, the entire victim was laid upon the altar and burned whole. But later, only portions were sacrificed, while the rest became the priest's share. The priests wore crowns made of leaves from the sacred tree of the deity they called upon. For Apollo, laurel crowns were worn. For Heracles, poplar. This practice eventually spread to the public, who wore crowns at banquets and festivities. During special occasions, the horns of the victim were adorned with gold, and the altars were decorated with flowers and sacred herbs. The sacrifices were conducted with care. All preparations made: a salt cake, the sacrificial. Knife and crowns were placed in a small basket, carried by a young maiden to the sanctuary. The victim was led into the temple, often accompanied by music. If it was small, it was driven freely to the altar. If large, it was led by a long rope, showing it was not a reluctant sacrifice. Once everyone gathered, the priest would walk solemnly around the altar, sprinkling it with a mixture of meal and holy water. He would then sprinkle the worshippers, inviting them to join in prayer. After the service, the priest would taste the libation, and after the congregation followed suit, he poured the remainder between the horns of the victim. Frankincense was scattered upon the altar, and a portion of the meal and water was poured upon the animal before it was sacrificed. If the victim escaped or struggled, it was seen as an ill omen. But if it passed quietly, it was considered a good sign. For sacrifices to the aerial gods, music filled the air, dances encircled the altar, and sacred hymns were sung. These hymns celebrated the gods, recounting their deeds of kindness and the gifts they shared with humanity. In the end, the gods were invoked for continued favor, and a feast followed the service. The quest to glimpse the future, to avert impending danger, has driven humanity throughout the ages. The Greeks sought prophetic knowledge from oracles, whose words were interpreted by specially appointed priests. The most renowned oracle was that of Apollo at Delphi, revered across the world. People traveled from far and wide to consult this divine voice, with 1 month each year dedicated to this sacred practice. The priestess, known as the Pythia, derived her name from the serpent Python, whom Apollo had slain. After bathing in the waters of the Castalian spring, she was led into the temple by priests. Seated on a 3-legged stool or tripod, above a cave that exhaled sulfurous vapors, she would enter an ecstatic state, uttering wild phrases believed to be the voice of Apollo himself. The priests would then interpret these words, often in such a way that the predictions could not easily be disputed. As the ceremony unfolded, clouds of incense filled the temple, obscuring the priestess from the uninitiated. When it concluded, she was gently led back to her cell, often in a faint state. One striking example of the oracle's ambiguity involved Croesus, the wealthy king of Lydia. Before going to war with Cyrus, the king of Persia, he sought the oracle's guidance on his chances of success. The oracle replied that if he crossed a certain river, he would destroy a great empire. Interpreting this as a favorable sign, Croesus crossed the river, only to be defeated by Cyrus, leading to the destruction of his own empire. Thus, the oracle's prediction was fulfilled. Soothsayers. In ancient Greece, the people believed in the power of soothsayers. These special individuals could glimpse the future. They interpreted dreams, watched the flight of birds, examined the entrails of sacrificed animals, and even observed the dance of flames and smoke rising from altars. Augurs. In Rome, these soothsayers were known as augurs. They held great importance. No venture was begun without first seeking their guidance. Their insights were considered vital for success. Festivals. Festivals were times of rest and joy, seasons of thanksgiving. They marked anniversaries of significant events. The oldest celebrations followed the harvest. Days filled with merriment and gratitude. The first fruits of the fields were offered to the gods, accompanied by heartfelt prayers. In the cities, festivals honored special deities. They were grand occasions, with elaborate ceremonies, gorgeous processions, exciting games and chariot races, dramatic performances reenacting tales of gods and heroes. Let us explore some of the most enchanting Greek and Roman festivals. Greek festivals. Eleusinian Mysteries. One of the oldest and most revered festivals was the Eleusinian Mysteries, held in honor of Demeter and Persephone. The name comes from Eleusis, a town in Attica, where the goddess herself first introduced the mysteries. They were divided into the greater and lesser mysteries, celebrated every 5 years. The greater, honoring Demeter, lasted 9 days in autumn, while the lesser, dedicated to Persephone, took place in spring. The secrets shared with initiates were profound, moral teachings drawn from the myths of Demeter and Persephone. The most cherished belief was the immortality of the soul. Those who participated felt a sweet hope for both this life and the next. It was said, "In the mysteries, no one is sad." The initiation was a solemn affair, originally reserved for Athenians, with awe-inspiring ceremonies. Secrecy was paramount, and breaking it was met with dire consequences. After initiation, joyous celebrations erupted. Chariot races, wrestling matches, and solemn sacrifices filled the air. The lesser mysteries prepared the way for the greater. Thesmophoria. The Thesmophoria was another festival for Demeter, celebrating her role in marriage and the social bonds of agriculture. This festival was a gathering of women. Dionysia. A vibrant spring festival honored Dionysus. In March, it lasted several days. The Greater Dionysia was particularly splendid in Athens. Strangers traveled from afar to join the festivities. The city adorned with garlands of ivy. Laughter and joy filled the streets. During the processions, the statue of Dionysus was carried. Men and women crowned with ivy danced in colorful costumes. They played drums, pipes, and flutes, some dressed as Silenus, others as Pan or Satyrs. The air was alive with songs honoring the wine god. Public shows, games, and sports brought the city to life. New comedies and tragedies were introduced. Prizes awarded to those that captured the hearts of the audience. The Lesser Dionysia, celebrated in rural areas in November, a time of drinking, feasting, and merriment. In some Dionysian festivals, women known as Menada or Bacchantes joined in mystic rites. Clad in fawn skins, they gathered at night on mountains, carrying torches and thyrsi filled with religious fervor. They danced wildly, lost in ecstatic celebration. In their frenzy, they would tear apart the sacrificial animals. These bacchanalia later reached Rome, where men were allowed to join, but the excesses led to state intervention, and the rites were eventually prohibited. Panathenea. The Panathenea was a grand festival in Athens, honoring Athene Polias, the guardian of the city. There were 2 versions, the lesser and the greater. The lesser was held annually, while the greater, a multi-day celebration, occurred every 4 years. For the greater Panathenea, a special garment was woven, an embroidered peplus, adorned with gold. It depicted Athene's victory over the giants. This garment was displayed on a ship. During a grand procession through the city, the people carrying olive branches joined in. Amidst music and rejoicing, they made their way to the temple of Athene Polias, where the peplus was placed upon the goddess's statue. At this festival, Homer's poems were recited. Poets shared their own works. Musical contests, races, and wrestling matches filled the days. Boys danced in armor, celebrating the spirit of the occasion. Men who had served their country well were honored, presented with crowns of gold, their names announced by heralds. Victors in races received vases of oil, extracted from the sacred olive tree of Athene. Daphnephoria. The Daphnephoria was celebrated in Thebes, in honor of Apollo every 9th year. The distinguishing feature of this festival was a grand procession to the temple of Apollo. In this procession, a young priest, known as the Daphnephorus, walked proudly. He was of noble descent, splendidly attired, wearing a crown of gold. Before him, a youth carried an emblematic representation of the sun, moon, stars, and the days of the year. Following closely behind were beautiful maidens, bearing laurel branches, their voices rising in sweet hymns, honoring the god. The Saturnalia was a national festival, held in December, in honor of Saturn. It was celebrated after the harvest was gathered, and lasted several joyful days. During this time, there was universal rejoicing, a delightful cessation from labor, and merrymaking filled the air. School children enjoyed their holidays. Friends exchanged gifts, and the law courts closed their doors. No business was transacted. Crowds from the surrounding countryside flocked to Rome, dressed in every variety of masquerade. Practical jokes were shared, all in the spirit of good humor. Shouts of exultation filled the air, as all classes surrendered to enjoyment. For a time, social distinctions faded away, even reversed. Masters served their slaves at banquets, where the slaves wore the garments of their masters. It seems that the modern carnival is a reflection of the ancient Saturnalia. The Cereal Festival was celebrated in honor of Ceres. It was a solemn occasion, exclusively for women who dressed in white garments, wandering with torches in hand. They represented the search of the goddess for her daughter, Proserpine. During this festival, games were held in the Circus Maximus, and only those clothed in white were allowed to enter. The Vestalia was a festival held in honor of Vesta on the 9th of June. It was celebrated solely by women, who walked barefoot in procession to the temple of the goddess. The priestesses of Vesta, known as Vestals or Vestal virgins, played a significant role. There were 6 of them, chosen from the noblest families in Rome, between the ages of 6 and 10. Their term of office lasted 30 years. In the first 10 years, they were initiated into their sacred duties. In the second 10, they performed those duties, and in the third, they instructed novices. Their chief responsibility was to watch over and feed the ever-burning flame on the altar of Vesta. The extinguishing of this flame was seen as a national calamity, filled with ominous meaning. Great honors and privileges were bestowed upon them. The best seats at public spectacles were reserved for their use, and even consuls and praetors made way for them to pass. If they encountered a criminal on his way to execution, they had the power to pardon him if it could be shown that the meeting was accidental. The Vestals were vowed to chastity. A violation of this vow was met with the terrible punishment of being buried alive. Now let us drift into the legends and hear the tale of Cadmus. This is the legendary account of the founding of Thebes. After Zeus abducted his daughter Europa, Agenor, king of Phoenicia, was heartbroken. Unable to bear her loss, he sent his son Cadmus to search for her, commanding him not to return without her. For many years, Cadmus searched through various lands, but found no trace of her. Not daring to return home, he consulted the oracle of Apollo at Delphi. The oracle told him to cease his search and to take on a new duty, to found a city. The site would be revealed to him by a heifer that had never borne the yoke, lying down on the spot where the city would rise. As Cadmus left the sacred fane, he soon spotted a heifer free of servitude, walking slowly before him. He followed her for quite a distance, until she reached the future site of Thebes. There, she looked towards the heavens, and gently lowed, lying down in the soft grass. Grateful for this sign, Cadmus decided to offer her as a sacrifice, sending his followers to fetch water from a nearby spring. This spring, sacred to Ares, was hidden in a wood and fiercely guarded by a dragon. As Cadmus's retainers approached, the dragon pounced and swiftly killed them. After waiting anxiously for their return, Cadmus grew impatient. He armed himself with a lance and spear and set out to find them. Upon reaching the spring, he was met with a dreadful sight. The remains of his unfortunate followers lay scattered. Nearby, the fearsome dragon dripped with their blood. Cadmus seized a large rock and hurled it at the beast, but its tough black skin protected it like armor. Determined, Cadmus tried his lance, and this time it pierced the side of the creature. Furious with pain, the dragon lunged at him, but Cadmus leaped aside, managing to fix his spear in the dragon's jaws. With that final blow, the encounter came to an end. As Cadmus surveyed his vanquished foe, Pallas Athene appeared and commanded him to sow the teeth of the dead dragon into the ground. He obeyed, and from the furrows arose a band of armed men, who immediately began to fight among themselves, until only 5 remained. These last warriors made peace with one another, and with their help, Cadmus built the famed city of Thebes. In later times, the noblest families of Thebes proudly claimed their descent from these mighty earthborn warriors. Ares was furious when he discovered Cadmus had slain his dragon, and would have killed him had not Zeus intervened. Instead, Ares softened his punishment to 8 years of servitude. After this time, the god of war reconciled with Cadmus, and, as a sign of forgiveness, gave him the hand of his daughter, Harmonia, in marriage. Their wedding was almost as celebrated as that of Peleus and Thetis. All the gods honored them with their presence, offering rich gifts and heartfelt congratulations. Cadmus gifted his lovely bride a splendid necklace, crafted by Hephaestus, which, after Harmonia's death, proved fatal to its possessor. Cadmus and Harmonia had one son, Polydorus, and 4 daughters, Autono, Ino, Semele, and Agave. For many years, the founder of Thebes reigned happily, but eventually, a conspiracy arose against him. He was overthrown by his grandson, Pentheus. Together with his faithful wife, Harmonia, he retired into Illyria. After their deaths, Zeus transformed them into serpents, and they were taken to Elysium. Perseus, one of the most celebrated heroes of ancient times, was the son of Zeus and Danae, the daughter of Acrisius, king of Argos. An oracle had foretold to Acrisius that a son of Danae would bring about his demise. To protect himself, he imprisoned her in a tower of brass, keeping her hidden away from the world. But Zeus, in a shimmering shower of gold, descended through the roof of the tower, and Danae became his beloved. For 4 long years, Acrisius remained unaware of this union. Yet one evening, as he passed by the brazen chamber, he heard the soft cry of a child. This sound revealed the secret of his daughter's marriage to Zeus. Enraged by his failed precautions, Acrisius ordered that mother and child be placed in a chest and cast into the sea. But Zeus had other plans. He commanded Poseidon to calm the raging waters and guided the chest safely to the island of Seriphus. There, Dictys, the brother of Polydectes, the island's king, was fishing on the shore. Spotting the chest stranded on the beach, he felt pity for its occupants and took them to the palace, where they were treated with kindness. Eventually, Polydectes married Danae and provided Perseus with an education worthy of a hero. As Perseus grew into a noble young man, Polydectes sought to inspire him to achieve great deeds. After much thought, they decided that slaying the Gorgon Medusa would bring him the fame he desired. To succeed, Perseus needed magical items: winged sandals, a magic wallet, and the helmet of Aides, which granted invisibility. These treasures were held by the nymphs, known only to the Greeks, ancient sisters who shared one eye and one tooth. Perseus set out on his quest, guided by Hermes and Pallas Athene. After a long journey, he reached the distant shores of Oceanus, where the Greeks lived. He approached them for information, but when they refused, he took their single eye and tooth, only returning them when they revealed the way to the nymphs. With their guidance, he obtained the magical items he sought. Now equipped with the helmet and wallet, and armed with a sickle from Hermes, he donned the winged sandals and soared to the lair of the Gorgons, finding them fast asleep. Remembering the warning of his celestial guides, that anyone who gazed upon these sisters would turn to stone, he turned his face away. Using his shining shield, he captured their reflection, and with Pallas Athene's guidance, he swiftly cut off Medusa's head, placing it in his wallet. From the severed neck sprang forth the winged horse Pegasus, and Chrysaor, the father of the giant Geryon. Hurrying away, he evaded the wrath of Medusa's sisters, who awoke to seek vengeance. His invisible helmet concealed him from their sight, while the winged sandals carried him swiftly over land and sea, far from their reach. As he flew over the burning sands of Libya, drops of Medusa's blood fell from the wallet, creating a multitude of colorful snakes that spread across the land. Perseus continued his journey until he arrived in the kingdom of Atlas. Seeking rest and shelter, he approached the king. But Atlas, wary of losing his golden orchard to the slayer of Medusa, refused him hospitality. Angered by this ungracious rejection, Perseus revealed the head of Medusa, transforming Atlas into a massive mountain. His beard and hair became forests, his shoulders and limbs turned to stone, and his head rose into a craggy peak that touched the clouds. With that, Perseus continued on his path. His winged sandals carried him over vast deserts and towering mountains, until he reached Ethiopia, ruled by King Cepheus. There, he found the land ravaged by floods, towns and villages in ruins. On a cliff by the shore, he saw a beautiful maiden chained to a rock. This was Andromeda, the king's daughter. Her mother, Cassiopeia, had boasted that her beauty surpassed that of the Nereides. Angered, the sea nymphs called upon Poseidon, who unleashed a terrible monster upon the land. To save their kingdom, the Ethiopians consulted the oracle of Jupiter Ammon, who declared that only the sacrifice of the king's daughter could appease the beast. Though heartbroken, Cepheus ultimately surrendered his beloved child, and Andromeda was chained to the rock, while her parents mourned below. Upon learning of this tragic fate, Perseus offered to slay the monster, on the condition that Andromeda would become his bride. Overjoyed at the prospect of her rescue, King Cepheus agreed. Perseus hurried to the rock, whispering words of comfort to the trembling maiden. Then, donning the helmet of Hades once more, he took to the skies, awaiting the approach of the fearsome creature. Presently, the sea opened, and the great shark-like head of the gigantic beast of the deep rose above the waves. With a furious lash of his tail, he leaped forward to seize his victim. But the gallant hero, watching for his moment, suddenly darted down. From his wallet, he produced the head of the Medusa, holding it before the eyes of the dragon. In that instant, the hideous body of the creature began to transform, slowly turning into a huge black rock. This rock would remain forever, a silent witness to the miraculous deliverance of Andromeda. Perseus then led the maiden to her now joyful parents. Eager to show their gratitude, they ordered immediate preparations for a grand nuptial feast. But the young hero was not to claim his lovely bride. Without contest, in the midst of the banquet, Phineus, the king's brother, who had been betrothed to Andromeda, returned to claim her. With a band of armed warriors, he forced his way into the hall, and a desperate encounter unfolded. Between the rivals, could have ended fatally for Perseus, had he not suddenly remembered the Medusa's head. Calling to his friends to avert their faces, he drew it from his wallet, holding it before Phineus and his formidable bodyguard. In that moment, they all stiffened into stone. Now Perseus took his leave of the Ethiopian king, and, with his beautiful bride, returned to Seriphus. There, a joyful reunion took place between Danae and her son. He sent a messenger to his grandfather, informing him of his intention to return to Argos. But Acrisius, fearing the fulfillment of the oracle's prediction, fled to his friend Titimias, king of Larissa, determined to bring the aged monarch back. Perseus followed him there, yet a strange fate awaited. During some funereal games, held in honor of the king's father, Perseus, by an unfortunate throw of the discus, accidentally struck his grandfather, becoming the innocent cause of his death. After honoring Acrisius with solemn rites, Perseus returned to Argos, but feeling reluctant to occupy the throne of one whose death he had caused, he exchanged kingdoms with Megapenthes, the king of Tiryns. In time, he founded the cities of Mycenae and Medea. The head of the Medusa he presented to his divine patroness, Pallas Athene, who placed it in the center of her shield. Many great heroes descended from Perseus and Andromeda, foremost among them Heracles, whose mother, Alcmene, was their granddaughter. Heroic honors were paid to Perseus, not only throughout Argos, but also in Athens, and on the island of Seriphus. Now let us speak of Ion. Ion was the son of Creusa, the beautiful daughter of Erechtheus, king of Athens, and the sun god Phoebus Apollo. Their union was a secret, unknown to her father. Fearing Erechtheus' anger, Creusa placed her newborn babe in a little wicker basket. She hung golden charms around his neck, invoking the protection of the gods, and concealed him in a lonely cave. Apollo, pitying his abandoned child, sent Hermes to carry him to Delphi. There Hermes placed the babe on the steps of the temple. The next morning, the Delphic priestess discovered the infant. Charmed by his engaging appearance, she adopted him as her own son. The young child was cared for by his kind foster mother, growing up in the service of the temple, entrusted with minor duties of the holy edifice. Now back to Creusa. During a war with the Euboeans, in which they were signally defeated, Soothes, son of Aeolus, distinguished himself on the side of the Athenians. As a reward for his valor, he was granted the hand of Creusa, the king's daughter, in marriage. Yet their union was not blessed with children, causing deep sorrow for both. They traveled to Delphi to consult the oracle. The response was clear. Soothes should regard the first person he met, upon leaving the sanctuary, as his son. As fate would have it, Ion, the young guardian of the temple, was the first to greet him. When Soothes beheld the beautiful youth, he welcomed him as his son, declaring that the gods had sent him to be a blessing in his old age. Creusa, however, filled with suspicion and jealousy, concluded that the youth was the offspring of a secret marriage. An old servant, noticing her distress, urged her to find comfort, promising that her troubles would soon fade. At the grand banquet held for the public adoption of his son, the old servant mixed a strong poison into the wine of unsuspecting Ion. But Ion, following the ancient custom, poured a portion of the wine onto the ground as a libation before drinking. Suddenly, as if by a miracle, a dove flew into the banquet hall, sipping from the wine of the libation. The little creature began to quiver, and in moments, it expired. Ion's suspicions fell upon the obsequious servant who had filled his cup. He seized the old man, accusing him of murderous intent. Caught off guard, the servant admitted his guilt, pointing to Creusa as the instigator of the crime. Ion was ready to take revenge upon Creusa when, through divine intervention, his foster mother, the Delphic priestess, appeared. She explained the true relationship between Creusa and Ion. To ease all doubts, she produced the charms found around the infant's neck and the wicker basket that had carried him to Delphi. Mother and son reconciled, and Creusa revealed to Ion the secret of his divine origin. The priestess foretold that he would become the father of a great nation, the Ionians, and that Soothes and Creusa would have a son named Dorus, the progenitor of the Dorian people. Both predictions would come true in due time. Now let us speak of Daedalus and Icarus. Daedalus, a descendant of Erechtheus, was an Athenian architect, sculptor, and mechanician. He was the first to introduce the art of sculpture in its higher form, for before his time, statues were merely crude representations with undefined limbs. But great as was his genius, still greater was his vanity, and he could brook no rival. His nephew and pupil, Talus, showed remarkable talent. He had invented both the saw and the compass. Daedalus, fearing that Talus might overshadow his own fame, secretly killed him by throwing him down from the citadel of Pallas Athene. When the murder was discovered, Daedalus was summoned before the court of the Areopagus and condemned to death. Yet, he made his escape to the island of Crete, where he was received by King Minos in a manner worthy of his great reputation. Daedalus constructed for the king the world-renowned labyrinth. It was an immense building, full of intricate passages, intersecting each other in such a way that even Daedalus himself, on one occasion, nearly lost his way within it. In this labyrinth, the king placed the Minotaur, a monster with the head and shoulders of a bull, and the body of a man. As time passed, the great artist grew weary of his long exile. The king, under the guise of friendship, kept him almost a prisoner. So Daedalus resolved to escape. He ingeniously crafted wings for himself and his young son, Icarus. He diligently trained Icarus on how to use them. When the moment was right, father and son began their flight. They soared into the sky, but Icarus, enchanted by the thrill of flying, forgot his father's warning not to approach too near the sun. The wax that held his wings melted, and he fell into the sea and drowned. The tide washed Icarus's body ashore, and his grieving father buried him on an island he named Icaria. After this tragic event, Daedalus flew to the island of Sicily. There, he was warmly welcomed by King Cocalus, for whom he constructed several important public works. But soon, Minos learned that his great architect had found refuge with Cocalus. He sailed to Sicily with a large army, and sent messengers demanding the surrender of his guest. Cocalus feigned compliance and invited Minos to his palace, where he was treacherously put to death in a warm bath. The Cretans brought their king's body to Agrigent, where it was buried with great pomp, and a temple to Aphrodite was erected over his tomb. Daedalus spent the rest of his life peacefully in Sicily, where he devoted himself to creating various beautiful works of art. And so, we bring part 2 of our journey to a gentle close. I hope you enjoyed drifting through these ancient myths and timeless whispers tonight. If you did, remember to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss part 2. There's so much more waiting for us in the shadows of history. Tell me in the comments what you found most fascinating, and where you're tuning in from. I love reading your thoughts and seeing how far these stories travel. Until next time, keep your mind open, your lights low, and let these old legends keep you company as you drift off to sleep. Good night, everyone.